Why don't you, ladies and gentlemen, start taking your seats. We're going to gavel in the opening session here in a minute. The committee will come to order. Good morning. I want to welcome you all here to the first full committee hearing on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for the 118th Congress. I want to welcome our new members, which we have about 14 new members on the committee, and of course welcome our returning members. I look forward to working with each and every one of you during this Congress, which I believe will be a very, very busy Congress, and our committee will be very, very busy. This morning's hearing is about looking into the future and how we build a 21st century infrastructure for America. But before we begin, I think it's important for us to remember some of the successes that the committee has had in the last Congress. Our committee worked in bipartisan fashion, was incredibly productive over the last 2 years. We were able to move large, complex pieces of legislation to improve America's infrastructure, the FAST Act, the WIN Act, our PREA passenger rail and Amtrak reforms bill, the PIPES Act, and the Coast Guard Authorization Act, and other committee bills are now law because we were able to build consensus and get things done for the American people. Our track record speaks to the hard work of our members and our staff. For our new committee members here today, take note. Our goal is the same level of success for this Congress, so get ready to roll up your sleeves and get to work, or get ready to jump in the ditch with the pick and the shovel. We got a lot of work ahead of us. America's infrastructure is the backbone of the economy. As a people, we are bound together by our values, our dedication to our liberty, our freedoms. But physically, we are bound together by our transportation network. And this is a large country, and it wouldn't be the great country it is today if it wasn't for that physical connection, coast to coast, northern border to the southern border states. And from the beginning of our very first Congress, that authorized the first federal lighthouse, the Transcontinental Railroad to the Panama Canal, to the interstate highway system, to the nation's airports. The federal government has played a vital role, a constitutional role. And in fact, I took the liberty of this year, we put up, behind those of you in the audience behind you, we put up two, which I think are important pieces of history. First, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, talking about what governments to do for the people, and basically it boils to three things. It's provide security, preserve justice, and erect and maintain infrastructure to promote commerce. So that's a fundamental role of government, whether it's the federal government, the state government, or local governments. And then, of course, the Founding Fathers, who all read Adam Smith when they penned the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 talks about powers of Congress to protect the common defense, regulate commerce, and to establish post roads. And of course, the post roads today are the highways and byways of our nation. And I'm proud to say that the first highway authorized and appropriations went to build a road happened to go through my district and the home of one of our witnesses here, Mr. Trumka, right through Fayette County and Greene County, Pennsylvania. The national road, which is Route 40 from Baltimore to the Ohio Territory. So again, from the beginning of our founding of our nation, it's important to, and that highway, by the way, is over 200 years old. It was finished in about 1815 or 1816. So again, from the beginning of our country, the federal government has had a role, and it needs to have a strong role. And strong infrastructure means a strong America, an America that competes globally, supports local, regional economic development, and creates jobs. However, our infrastructure will face significant challenges in the future, and we're facing challenges today to rebuild it. But in the future, the forecasts predict that our population will grow from about 320 million just last year to 400 million by 2051. The movement of freight is expected to increase by 40% over the next 30 years. And I have, right in my district, I have Route 81 that's a four-lane highway that it looks like a railroad at night because there's so many trucks on it, there's so much freight, so much commerce moving on that highway. And that's just one roadway in America, and there are many, many others that look like that. By the end of the next decade, air travel demand is expected to increase from 750 million passengers annually to 1 billion. And transportation technology continues to evolve. Driverless cars, commercial drones, and commercial space travel are just a few examples of this change, but more changes are coming. Our infrastructure policies have to keep pace with these changing technologies. We must be able to meet our infrastructure needs of today, but also be poised to tackle the challenges of tomorrow. One thing November's election taught us was that the American people are ready for their elected officials to rethink the way we do things here in Washington and challenge the status quo. This election also raised the profile of infrastructure in the minds of the American people and policymakers. In fact, I believe this was the first time a president ever mentioned the word infrastructure in an inaugural address. This feeling of optimism has echoed over 400 associations who wrote in support of investing in infrastructure and fixing the Highway Trust Fund. Their thoughts are contained in this letter, which I believe I have here. I'm supposed to hold it up, but I don't know where it went. This is the letter. 400 different associations have signed to it, and I'd like to enter this into the record without objection, so ordered. What this means for us, it means that we now have a unique opportunity. The wind is at our backs, and it's time to act on our infrastructure's needs. President Trump made a promise to the American people that he would reassert America's greatness. And from my perspective, that means ensuring that America is competitive in the crowded global marketplace of today and tomorrow. It means reimagining and building and rebuilding a 21st century infrastructure, leveraging resources from all levels of government and the private sector. Modern infrastructure lets our people, goods, products, and crops get where they need to go more efficiently and at less cost. It improves the improved roads and bridges that reduce bottlenecks and problems that slow the flow of commerce. Modern infrastructure is an aviation system with truly modern, efficient, transformational air traffic control technology. It's ports and waterways let our farmers and manufacturers move their crops and products to remain competitive with other nations. It's rail systems that focus on more effective, efficient service in regions of the country where rail transportation works well. It's pipelines that can transport the energy products that will power us into the future. It's infrastructure that is resilient when natural disaster strikes. It's infrastructure that can be built faster, unburdened by bureaucracy and impediments to private investment. And it's infrastructure that encourages innovation and unleashes the next revolution in mobility. Modern infrastructure means jobs, because when transportation efficiency improves the bottom line of our job creators, then they can put more people to work. That's my vision for the 21st century infrastructure, and it can be achieved if we work together and build it. I welcome our panel of experts here today. Look forward to hearing from you, and your organizations have a unique understanding of our infrastructure needs, and as I look out there, they're all the users of the system and people that build the system, but again, use the system. And we really appreciate your taking the time being here from all of you, the positions you hold at your organizations at the highest level, and I know that your schedules are very demanding, so we really appreciate you being here, and I think it demonstrates the importance of what we're talking about here today. Your companies and workers depend on the functionality of our transportation system networks, so your perspective is critical to helping us shape the future of America's infrastructure. And with that, I'd now like to yield to recognize the ranking member, Mr. DeFazio, for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much share the sentiments you've expressed. I was interested to learn that the first earmarked highway project in America runs through your district. So that's hopefully we can.
It wasn't my father.
We can. Is that the one they named after your dad? Okay. And I hope we can bring back congressionally designated spending where we set priorities for some small amount of our annual investment. We know our districts and our states better than Washington, D.C. bureaucrats of either party. I also agree with your sentiment about challenging the status quo. I'm going to talk about that now. The status quo has been we are frozen in amber. We are refusing to invest in our infrastructure. Yeah, the FAST Act was good, but part of it's paid for with funny money that'll never show up because we didn't have the guts here to increase user fees. It's time to confront these issues. The American people get it. A number of all red states have raised their gas tax. Nobody has been recalled or lost their election. The people get it. They're tired of sitting in congestion. So I'm going to talk about real things. Okay, let's index the gas tax. Radical proposal. We're going to index it to construction cost inflation, fleet fuel economy. Gas will go up maybe 1.2 cents a gallon next year. Anybody think they're going to lose their election over that? But if we do that, over the next 30 years, we can issue 30-year bonds, would tranche the bond issuance of $500 billion, which would mean $23 billion additional per year expenditure, and we would make the trust fund whole through the next 3 authorizations, and we would bring the nation's infrastructure to a state of good repair in 14 years. And I think that's what the president called for last week in Philadelphia. He said, fix it first. We do need to fix it first. We need to fix the 140,000 bridges that are falling down. We need to fix the 60% of the pavement on the national highway system that doesn't just need another coat of asphalt. It needs to be totally restructured. And we need to deal with the $90 billion backlog in our transit systems just to bring them up to a state of good repair, let alone offer new options. My plan would both allow us to bring it up to a state of good repair in a reasonable period of time and to make new investments because it would make the trust fund whole. That's all we'd have to do, just index the gas tax, dedicate it, and issue 30-year bonds. Now, second, let's talk about, again, a little bit of political will. We are collecting a tax every day from every American consumer who buys any imported good. They are paying a tax. And that tax is supposed to go to maintaining the nation's harbors. Well, it isn't. Half the money, on an annual basis, goes into harbor maintenance work. That's why we have a $22 billion backlog to be able to accommodate the new ships, in addition to another $10 billion or so of failing jetties and other things. We're only spending half of the tax the American people pay every day, every year. The rest of it is being diverted into la-la land. It's pretend deficit reduction. It's theoretically sitting in a $9 billion account in the Treasury. If we waive the stupid House budget rules and we spend that $9 billion, which we took from the American people on the purpose for which it was intended, and spend the full tax every year for the next 10 years, we could invest $32 billion in our harbors. That means they would be ready to receive the big ships, would take care of that $22 billion shortfall, and we could repair the jetties and make other improvements. That money is already available. We don't need a new tax. We just need to push the Budget Committee objections and some of the appropriators out of the way and say, no, we're going to make it into a real trust fund like we have for surface, and we're going to actually spend the tax for the purpose for which it's collected. Now, all that takes is a little bit of a challenge to the status quo. You don't even have to raise a tax. And then third, our airports are in serious trouble. $32.5 billion backlog to accommodate growing passenger demand. You've all been there. You've gone through what are essentially Greyhound bus stations instead of state-of-the-art terminals. Now, we haven't allowed them to increase the passenger facility charge. I've talked to all the airports. The largest airports have said to me, look, let us raise the passenger facility charge, a user fee only on people who go through that airport, and we will forego the AIP program. You can give that money to the small and moderate-sized airports so they can do needed projects, and we will pay for our own projects with bonding by dedicating an increase in the PFC. Many of these airports are bonded out. Now, the airline industry says, oh, if you increase the PFC by $2, nobody will ever fly again. They'll all get in their cars. Oh, you can charge me $50 to put my bag in the overhead, and I'll keep flying and smiling. But if I had to pay $2 so I don't have a Greyhound bus experience when I go to fly on an airplane and stand in these, unbelievable lines because we have inadequate capacity, I won't ever fly again. I mean, that's total BS. We all know that. They have some economist somewhere locked in a closet who claims he can prove it. What they're afraid of is if airports expand, we might have more competition. If we have more competition, that might mean that prices of tickets go down. That's the real reason that they object. So that takes a little political will. So here's 3 steps we could take to put nearly $600 billion to work, some of it tomorrow. Remember, there's a provision in the FAST Act that I got in there that says any additional funds allocated to transportation spend out immediately through the formulas we've already adopted. We don't have to go through a multi-year process. We don't have to go through debates or anything else. I would hope that we would add in congressionally designated spending for some portion of these new projects. But other than that, no other changes are necessary. The Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, waive the House budget rules, spend the money we're taking from the American people, and stand up to the airlines and say, look, come on. We want people to have a good experience both in the air and on the ground. Let's rebuild America's airports to meet the additional demand with a small addition on the passenger facility charge. Now, passenger facility charge is in the jurisdiction of this committee. Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund is a shared jurisdiction, obviously. And then, of course, the indexation of the gas tax would have to be approved by our colleagues on Ways and Means. But I think if we joined together, like we did back the last time when I was here, and we got an increase in the gas tax over the objections of many in Congress by having a bipartisan coalition to increase the gas tax in 1993, the last time it was increased, we could do it again. I hope that we can join and make common cause in these areas because we do need to rebuild our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. And now I'd like to welcome again our panelists. Thank you for being here. I'll introduce you now in group, and then we'll start with the testimony. But first off, Mr. Fred Smith, who's the chairman and president, CEO, and founder of FedEx Corporation. FedEx is a Fortune 500 company with over $50 billion in annual revenue. FedEx moves 12 million packages daily through the global transportation system, which gives them great perspective on the challenges that we faced. Next, Mr. David McLennan. It's Lennon like Lennon. Yeah. John Lennon there. Good job, Cohen. Sorry about that. Chairman and CEO of Cargill Incorporated. Cargill is the largest privately held corporation in the United States, producing food, agricultural, financial, and industrial products throughout the world. Cargill exports more than 200 million tons of dry bulk cargo each year, and it's a $120 billion a year corporation. Mr. Ludwig Willich, President and CEO of BMW America. BMW has invested over $7 billion to build and upgrade its manufacturing plant in Spartanburg, South Carolina, which employs nearly 9,000 people. Since it opened in 1992, American workers have produced 3.7 million vehicles, exporting 85% of them through the Port of Charleston. And next, Ms. Mary Andringo, Chairman of the Board of the Vermeer Corporation, based in Pella, Iowa. Vermeer manufactures and distributes agricultural, forest, and utility equipment to over 500 of its global dealerships. It exports 30% of its parts worldwide and annual sales of over $1 billion. And finally, Mr. Rich Trumka, President of the AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO is the umbrella organization for over 50 U.S. unions representing 12.5 million working men and women, and of course a fellow Pennsylvanian. Welcome to each and every one of you, and I look forward to your testimony and looking forward to working with you as we move forward. I now ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. And since your written testimony has been part of the record, we'd ask you to limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. And with that, we'll start with Mr. Smith. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think your mic's on. Is it? Can you pull it a little closer to me?
Is that better? Oh, okay, get it.
There you go. Thanks.
I served in the Marine Corps, so I had to be instructed carefully. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeFazio, let me say hello to a couple of old friends, Representative Cohen, who represents our hometown headquarters, and Representative Duncan from the more prosperous eastern part of our state, so it's good to see you. As you mentioned, my written statement is in the record. So let me make a few points. I think at FedEx Corporation, we're uniquely situated to comment on these matters. I'm proud to be here representing over 450,000 FedEx team members around the world. We have four transportation companies that are affected by these infrastructure questions. FedEx Express, the largest all-cargo and express air carrier in the world. FedEx Ground, the second largest ground parcel network. And FedEx Freight, the largest less-than-truckload system in the United States. And finally, FedEx Trade Networks avails itself of maritime transportation. We serve 220 countries, link 99% of the world's GDP, operate 650 aircraft, serve 375 airports, operate 150,000 motorized vehicles. As you mentioned, we move 12 million shipments on average per day in the non-peak season. We fly 255 million miles each year, and last year FedEx vehicles drove in excess of 5 billion miles on our highways. We strongly support a modernized transportation system that includes the best air traffic control system, updated sea and airports with the latest in technology, and well-maintained and expanded highway systems. So let me talk briefly about all three of those. Improving the ATC system, ensuring transparency in the payment for that system, and assuring irrelevant provisions are not added to the legislation should be priorities of this committee. We support an independent ATC system and believe that such an enterprise will work more effectively and efficiently than the current one. The new AT system must be allowed to operate as a bona fide standalone business organization, separate and apart from the government and responsible to its users. Regarding the interstate road system, our interstate system is now over 60 years of age. It's in desperate need of updating. Nearly 70% of all freight tonnage moved in the U.S. moves on trucks. I think you mentioned that, Mr. Chairman. We need both short and long-term investment. The surface transportation industry has been virtually unanimous in supporting an increase in the federal system to pay for this system, first through the gasoline and diesel system and moving to a user fee system, given the emergence of non-internal combustion engines in the form of electric and hybrid vehicles, some of which we are operating in Washington, D.C. as we sit here today. And lastly, we strongly support a new federal standard to move the twin trailer limits in this country from 28 feet to 33 feet for the less than truckload and ground parcel businesses. Quite frankly, these networks are being overwhelmed with the growth in e-commerce. 33-foot twin trailers are permitted in certain states. We've operated them for many years. They're safer, save millions and millions of gallons of fuel, reduce emissions. They take vehicles off the road, which gets to the congestion issue that you were talking about, Mr. Chairman. I might point out that the standard in Mexico is twin 40-foot trailers. So this is not a big stretch. This would have an instant improvement environmentally and in the national productivity in our less than truckload and ground parcel networks. Let me just close with saying to you, there's been a lot of conversation in Washington these days about trade. FedEx is ardently in support of expanded trade, not less trade. We certainly acknowledge the protectionism and mercantilism, particularly of China, but the secret to that is to expand our access to their market, not shut down the trading system that's made this country so prosperous. Thank you for giving me the time to make these remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Now, Mr. McGlennon.
Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member DeFazio, and distinguished members of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm Dave McLennan. I'm Chairman and CEO of Cargill. We provide food, agriculture, financial products, and industrial products to the world. and our mission is to nourish the country and nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. Our company is a great American success story. It was founded in 1865 by William W. Cargill with one small grain warehouse in Conover, Iowa. That elevator almost went bankrupt just a few years later when the railroad stopped coming to Conover. Mr. Cargill knew that transportation drives growth in agriculture, so he followed the infrastructure, and today we have 150,000 employees in 70 countries around the world. Thank you for your past leadership on the reauthorization of WARDA, and as well as the passage of the FAST Act. I'm encouraged by the interest of this committee in modernizing our nation's infrastructure and eager to discuss the challenges facing our agriculture support system. For much of our history, America's infrastructure has been the envy of the entire world. It's allowed our country to become the economic powerhouse that we are today. And certainly for agriculture and the rural communities which serve agriculture, moving product for trade and export is critical. But while many other countries are building the roads, ports, and railways of the future, we are falling behind. Infrastructure investments will allow American companies to compete effectively with our counterparts abroad and create long-term growth that will benefit and create jobs for all Americans. 21st century infrastructure includes shiny objects like electric cars and microgrids and high-speed rail. But as exciting as those new technologies are, we also need to think about our traditional transportation assets. So my testimony will focus not on the shiny objects, but on the ones that can get rusty, like rails, roads, bridges, and the waterways of rural America. Mr. Chairman, agriculture is the largest user of freight transportation in the United States, claiming 31% of all ton miles, according to the USDA. And in our world of thin margins, when infrastructure fails, it ripples up the supply chain and we all feel it. Cargill supports multiple modes of transportation. What is most important to us is making sure our customers can get their goods from point A to point B in an efficient, safe, and sustainable manner. Unfortunately, our nation's transportation infrastructure is under unprecedented strain. Our inland waterways struggle because of aging locks and growing demand. Our seaports are not deep enough to accommodate newer and larger ships. Our railroads are experiencing capacity constraints, and our bridges and roads are crumbling, receiving a D rating from the American Society of Civil Engineers. If our ports fail, we cannot link the Pacific Northwest grain farmers to the global market. If our locks and dams fail, we can't move the road salt that we mine in Louisiana up the rivers to keep the roads safe in the winter in Pittsburgh. If our bridges crumble, we cannot cost-effectively truck fertilizer to family farmers in Platte City, Missouri. And if our railroads are over capacity, we can't ensure enough ethanol makes it to New Jersey to be blended into gasoline for our cars. We know what it looks like when one mode of transportation fails and the consequences ripple up the supply chain. In 2005, when Hurricane Katrina shut down the Gulf ports, we lost the ability to transport grain on our nation's waterways. Losing this very efficient transportation capacity greatly impacted the price of corn paid to farmers, with U.S. corn prices falling 30 cents a bushel. In 2005, the U.S. corn crop was 10 billion bushels. So that's $3 billion in lost market value at the time. In the chairman's home state of Pennsylvania, crumbling bridges near our beef plant in Wyalusing were recently bypassed for replacement. Reduced weight limits made them impassable for our carriers, and in the rural town where we employ more than 1,700 workers, trucks for moving beef to our customers are focused to reroute, which adds millions of dollars in cost to our business to date. So in closing, our ability to fix our infrastructure, compete in the global market, and keep our economy growing will be influenced by the decisions of the people in this room. I urge you to invest in the food and agriculture and rural economies by reinvesting in state-of-the-art transportation system that we all know clearly got us here in the first place. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to share Cargill's views with you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. And Mr. Village, may I proceed?
Thank you, Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio and members of the committee for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. My name is Ludwig Willich. I'm the head of the Americas for the BMW Group. I present the more than 70,000 people who have jobs provided and supported by BMW in the US alone. This includes 655 dealerships across 48 states, 11 distribution centers in 8 states, our headquarters in New Jersey, a design studio, tech office, and testing facilities in California, a bank in Utah, financial services in Ohio, BMW Technology Corporation in Chicago, our carbon fiber manufacturing facility in Washington State, and BMW Manufacturing in South Carolina. Over the last 2 decades, we've invested $7.5 billion in our South Carolina plant, now the largest facility in our global network. What is more, this plant earns BMW the title of the largest exporter of vehicles in the United States by value. We estimate that BMW had around $10 billion in US dollars to export last year alone. We have a talented team and achieve much within our company. However, no one in this industry can get it alone. Every auto company relies on a network of suppliers, service providers, reliable infrastructure, and the right regulatory framework to deliver for our customers. In this spirit, I would like to give you a sense of how important these issues are through BMW's eyes. The current BMW X3 was designed by an American, Eric Goplin, out of our Los Angeles design studio, DesignWorks. Once the design is finished, it was sent to Munich for engineers to take the car from page to pavement. The next step is production in the United States. Our logistics network in South Carolina includes 40 nearby suppliers, the Greer Inland Railway Port, and the Greenville-Spartanburg Airport. We rely on these roads, rails, and runways every day. A finished X3 leaves the plant by rail, with the majority heading to the Port of Charleston for international export to 140 countries. On this point, I would like to give you special thanks to the committee, in particular Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio and Representative Sanford of South Carolina for the support of the Water Resources Development Act. The Port of Charleston is absolutely critical to export success of BMW and a number of other companies. The remainder of the domestic vehicles are trucked to BMW vehicle distribution centers in states across the country. From those distribution centers, the X3 is then delivered to dealers in 48 states. Reliable transportation and infrastructure is vital to operating our business every day. Looking ahead at future mobility technologies, infrastructure becomes all the more important. Industry is making significant investments in automated vehicles, or AVs, to move them from test track to street. There are ways for the government to support these efforts. Some of these opportunities are fairly straightforward. For example, the sensors and cameras in automated vehicles rely, among other things, on road markings and signs to orient and drive. Consistent AV performance can suffer if roads do not have adequate lines, road conditions are unpredictable, or signs and signals are all different. Consistent performance is vitally important as it lays the foundation for customer trust. Other areas of necessary government support are more involved but crucial to the long-term success of AVs. BMW welcomed the federal AV policy guidelines as a positive first step in creating a regulatory framework for AVs. Industry, regulators, and the public need to continue meaningful conversations to move forward. There's a lot of work to be done, but with so many stakeholder groups aligned on the desired outcomes, I'm confident we can find a path forward. This is an opportunity that requires all stakeholders to bring their best ideas and open minds to the table. I look forward to continuing our conversation and working together to make tomorrow's potential a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Andrenka. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio and members of this committee for hearing a little bit about what it means for manufacturers to have an updated infrastructure system. Our company, Vermeer, was started 70 years ago by my dad with one employee, one product, and really distributing products locally. Today, we have over 2,000 employees and 160 different products. And I realize those numbers are small in comparison to my fellow board members and panel members here, but you know, it represents really a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. In our country, 50% of GDP and over 50% of employment is connected with small and medium-sized businesses. And so what my dad needed for infrastructure back in 1948 is different than what we need today. And as chair of Vermeer and former CEO, I've also had the opportunity to chair the National Association of Manufacturers, which represents 12 million men and women who manufacture every day. And when I first became involved with the NAM, we talked about how our goal was that the U.S. be the best place to manufacture. And in order for it to be the best, we need to have good, top-notch infrastructure. It's been at the top of our list for many years. So in a company like ours, when we bring over 2,000 people in from anywhere from 30 to 70 miles driving distance one way every day, we need safe, reliable roads for them to get to work safely and also to be able to get home safely with their families. We also have 50 trucks which ride every day into Vermeer with parts and pieces and go out with whole goods. So we need the good infrastructure roads for that. Major roads in the U.S., 65% are deemed deficient. And also, I think we have to understand that road conditions often are a significant factor in fatalities on our roads. We also have hundreds of sales and service people that work with our distribution networks who are in urban areas, and they're dealing with congestion, and particularly in the urban areas, and traffic delays, and a lot of frustrations, plus getting trucks in and out of sometimes the urban areas to our dealerships and to our customers. One of the things, and I thank this committee for the work that you did on the Fast Lane grant. Because of that, we are going to now have intermodal place in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is much closer to us than trucking containers to Chicago or Kansas City. And that will help relieve some congestion that we have had in getting containers to ports. Bridges, it's been mentioned before, but I know just in Iowa, 21% of bridges in Iowa are deemed deficient. So again, it's a safety and a congestion and delay opportunity that we can fix. Airports are definitely in dire need of updates. We ship 400 to 500 packages to our customers daily with air. We also buy a lot of commercial tickets, over 3,000 a year, and yet we have a lot of frustration with delays in airports. And I think some of the work that needs to be done yet on the longer-term Federal Aviation Administration authorization bill is extremely important. Air traffic controllers are in many cases working with outdated technology, and also as we look at that next-gen implementation, that the estimates are that that would be able to reduce delays by 35%, which would be significant. Manufacturers use energy, all kinds of energies, so transmission lines, it's very important that we have good and solid transmission lines. And it's really the Internet of everything. So the way we communicate with our customers, with our dealers, with our employees in the United States and around the world, that broadband infrastructure is so important. And it's also important because today we have smart machines in our factories. We also have smart machines out on job sites, and many times they are communicating with the asset owners. Over the last years, Vermeer's been involved in the continuous improvement or lean journey. And one of the things with lean is you need to have flow. So you need to have flow of goods in at a timely basis, and you need to have whole goods going out on a timely basis. But another aspect of lean is total productive maintenance, and I think that one has some applications to infrastructure. It's when we take a machining center, maybe $1 million machining center, and periodically tear it down to the parts that are going to fail. We know they're going to fail, and we replace them. And the result is that we reduce our downtime on those machines like 70%, and we're also reduced our costs of maintenance. And it seems to me that manufacturers know a lot about investing in our infrastructure to make sure we've got a sustainable future. And I think that's the same kind of investment, proactive investment we need in our infrastructure system in the United States. So I would just like to say that this discussion has been going on for quite a while, and I really implore you all to really take some major steps. We need a sustained, focused effort to really reverse the decline and to make sure we've got the infrastructure that we need to produce safe transportation, productivity, and also great jobs here in the U.S. So thank you for the work your committee does.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Trumka, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member DeFazio, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. This committee is known for working together and setting aside partisan differences and getting things done for the good of the country, and I want to thank you for that. In recent years, you've passed many pieces of important legislation, and this year we'll bring FAA reauthorization and hopefully a major new infrastructure bill. Our nation faces challenges that are great, and the task ahead is very daunting. We're all familiar with the American Society of Civil Engineers estimate that our infrastructure deficit is approaching $4 trillion. Yet closing that gap is only the first step. The reality is our infrastructure is rapidly becoming technologically obsolete. To truly be competitive in the 21st century, we must invest in the transformative infrastructure of the future, this century's version of the Transcontinental Railroad and the National Highway System. So our failing infrastructure may be an obstacle and a challenge, but fixing it is really a powerful opportunity. During his campaign, President Trump spoke about $1 trillion in new infrastructure investment. We believe that's the right scale to be talking about, trillions, and the labor movement is ready to work with this committee to turn words into actions. Look at this panel before you. Business and labor may not agree on a number of things, but we do agree on the need for serious investments in America's infrastructure. In the aftermath of the 2016 election, there is no clearer mandate from the American people. And it should surprise no one that infrastructure is a top issue, because the American people have endured an infrastructure that's been underfunded and crumbling for decades. We want investments that create good jobs, that meet the real needs of our economy. Any other path takes us backwards, because investments in infrastructure create the foundation for a long-term growth. Building the infrastructure of the 21st century is vital to both our nation's competitiveness and to the hopes of hard-working people to lead better and more prosperous lives. So the labor movement is ready to fight here in Washington and across our great nation to see a transformative, inclusive infrastructure program enacted. We need to bring 21st century technology and good jobs to the entire country, to places as diverse as West Baltimore and my rural hometown, Mr. Chairman, of Nemacolin, Pennsylvania. And once that investment is made, the labor movement stands ready with the most highly skilled and well-trained workforce to get the job done. $1 trillion in new infrastructure investment would make a big difference to working Americans and put our nation on the path to sustainable prosperity. How we invest matters. It must be real investment, and it must create good jobs. And let me be clear. If we want good jobs, we have to have high labor standards and protections for people who build and maintain and operate our infrastructure. That's not all. We need to make sure public money is used to support American jobs, American resources, and American products. Finally, it's imperative that we invest at the lowest cost of capital to the public. Anything else simply sacrifices jobs to Wall Street. So finding significant sources of funding may be politically difficult, but the cost of inaction is unacceptably high, and it's real and it's growing. Labor has and will continue to consider all types of funding, including our traditional support of user fees to fund surface transportation. Done right, other resources or sources of revenue could help. However, solving our nation's vast infrastructure needs will require major levels of public investment. I'll be blunt, Mr. Chairman, we need to be bold and we need to be aggressive. We need to be the America that can, not the America that can't. We're eager to work with the leaders of both parties to make this investment a reality and help cure some of the problems that the country faces and my colleagues on this front table face. We stand ready to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to questions. I'll start, and I want to direct it at Mr. Vilish and Mr. McLennan. I appreciate that Ms. Andrango was very specific on projects that affected her business. Both of you made reference to it, but as we're looking at the 21st century infrastructure, what in your world of Cargill and BMW, what are the specifics? Where do we need to invest for manufacturers like you to be successful and to continue to grow?
Well, very obvious. The first thing is roads. That's where our cars
Sure.
are operated on. And that includes, as I said before, because we're on the verge of a big change as far as drivetrains is concerned, as far as automated driving is concerned. So markings is really crucial to the working of an automated automated car. The second thing is, of course, when it comes to infrastructure, it is the ports that really matter to us, which we need to both send cars into 140 countries from this country or receive parts and stuff that we need to build those cars with. So those two things are really, really crucial to us.
And to your bottom line, if that port isn't efficient, if that port can't take those bigger ships coming into Charleston, that affects your bottom line.
Absolutely. And just think, we just dredged the harbor of Charleston so it can have bigger ships that can go through the new Panama Canal, because all cars that we ship to Asia go through the Panama Canal. Right. So it is really vital to us.
And one thing is, you mentioned about the number of cars you export. According to what I see, you export more cars than General Motors.
Yeah.
Yes,
we do.
Producing.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. Mr. McLennan.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like your kids. You don't want to pick one over the other. And we use highway, we use rail cars, we use barges, and they're all interconnected. I mean, you know, you have a disruption in one, it flows back through the supply chain. I would say relative to our business, and especially our focus in the rural economy and the agricultural economy, I think rivers, ports, the riverways, they're environmentally efficient. They can carry bulk. They can only go so far, obviously. You know, they're limited. But I think, you know, rivers and ports and the access to the grain and the things that we move up and down, the products that we move up and down, we moved 97 different products in the river system in the last year. And the other statistic that I found rather staggering is that in the last year, our nation's locks were closed for over 141 million hours. So if you think about the disruption to the system and the backward ripple effect in the supply chain, I think I'd probably focus on for us, riverways, locks, the river system as being important.
And that has a huge impact on your bottom line.
Significant impact huge impact on our bottom line and the bottom line of our customers.
All right, which is the point of if you don't pay for it in the front end, you're going to pay for it in the back end.
Exactly. Pay me now or pay me later.
Right. Mr. Smith, you have the broadest use of the transportation system. Where in the 21st century, you know, should we be really targeting? And if you had to pick one or two that really have a huge impact on what you do in the States and globally, which modes would you think are the most efficient?
Well, as I said in my remarks, Mr. Chairman, a modernized ATC system expansion and maintenance upgrades of our interstate highway system. There are 20 interstate highway projects that are basically engineered and could move forward if the funding was there to do them. I don't think there's any question about the fact that President Eisenhower in the 1950s launching the interstate highway system was one of the most important things that led to the prosperity of this country. And we're simply not expanding it and maintaining it to the extent that we need to. And of course, I mentioned you don't have to do anything in terms of funding to approve the 33 footers. Those are the three things that we think would have profound and near instant improvements in the nation's infrastructure.
And improve your bottom line, which helps reduce the cost to customers ultimately.
Well, it improves our bottom line, and the thing that is just a nemesis for many parts of the country, the congestion continues to increase. And absent these investments in the infrastructure, that's not going to stop. So it's going to get worse and worse. And Mr. DeFazio's remarks, I think, were spot on. I mean, we've got to pay for it and get started on it.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll yield to Mr. DeFazio for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, and it was just mentioned by Mr. Smith and others referred to it, the cost of congestion. So I've taken it upon myself to create a infrastructure cost of congestion clock, which I posted on the Democrat side of the website. Hopefully it could become on the full committee site. And we just, for reference purposes, since this president has promised that he wants a major infrastructure plan, is expressing some frustration that it doesn't seem to be at the top of the agenda. I want to reinforce that, and this clock will recognize on a daily basis the costs of congestion to the American economy. And as you can see, it's running right now. And this is since the day the president was inaugurated. So I share the president's frustrations and hope that this committee can raise these issues to the top of the agenda, or the 100-day agenda. This reflects the cost both to individuals and to business in terms of congestion and delay. And just for average people, it's 84 minutes stuck in traffic since the day of inauguration because of undue congestion. With that, let me go back to my proposal. Is there anybody on the panel, and now Mr. Trumka, you represent millions of individuals, so you can speak for them, and all the rest of you are in business, and one use fair amounts of fuel directly or indirectly in moving your goods or in moving goods. Does anybody here think that a 0.5% increase in the cost of diesel would cause an undue disruption to the American economy, or a taxpayer revolt that would threaten people's political careers? Anybody want to think? Because that's what my plan would do. It would be about 0.5% if we index the gas per year increase. So, okay, that's great. And I think when you look at that number, it looks like a pretty darn good investment. I'd like to go back also to the harbor issue. You know, and we have, and probably even Ms. Andring, you probably import or export goods too. So I think we've got 4 people here directly involved in the import or export of goods, and some frustration about that. If you are importing goods, you're paying the tax, and I'm just wondering, you know, what do you think of the proposal that we should actually take the taxes that were collected to maintain our harbors and, you know, do away with this artifice of putting them in a theoretical bank account at the Treasury and actually spend them to deepen and improve our harbors? And anybody got any reflection on that?
I'll take the bait.
Yeah.
So you said it effectively in your opening remarks, Congressman. I mean, we've got this money that's been collected. We've paid it. It's there, and we need it. So obviously, you want to get good, effective, scalable projects. But you know, given what's happened, I mean, for example, the expansion of the Panama Canal, we're seeing more traffic on our riverways. I talked a few moments ago about the need for more efficient river traffic. It is environmentally efficient. You can get 50,000 bushels on one barge. You can get 1,000 bushels on a regular-sized truck. So I would support your proposal to spend the money, invest the money that has been collected from the users of the system.
I would reflect that Congress did, although most don't know it, increase the inland diesel waterway user fee, diesel tax, in a year-end budget deal 2 years ago. Kind of had to hide it. We had advocated for that, but were shut down as we went to the floor. But later it got snuck into the year-end budget deal. Made a lot of sense. And in this case, we don't have to increase it. We just have to spend the money as it comes in and spend the money that's been accumulated. Mr. Smith, you referenced 20 projects. Were those like major choke points that you said were already designed?
I have a list of them right here. North-South corridor, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, U.S. Route 220, Pennsylvania, New York, Raleigh, Norfolk corridor, North Carolina and Virginia, I-69 corridor, United States Route 59. They're all right there. The DOT, if you put a funding mechanism, you can get started on them right away.
What do they add up to? Did you add them up by any chance? Or?
In terms of money?
Yeah, cost.
I don't have the dollars invested here.
Right.
But just the route extensions that would improve the national productivity, reduce congestion.
Sure, thank you. Okay, and Mr. Trumka, do we have, some people say, well, gee, we really don't have the people to support and do the work if we make these major investments. There just aren't enough workers out there. I mean, look, the unemployment rate theoretically is down to 4%. Could you reflect on that, whether or not there is a ready and trained and available workforce if we did a major infrastructure push?
I'd be happy to. According to the latest BLS reports, there's still 670,000 construction workers that are out of business. That doesn't include discouraged workers who stopped looking for the jobs. It also doesn't include things like design, engineering, operation, maintenance, and warehousing, which are in a different category. All of those are available as well. This is the best-known secret in the United States. Other than the military, the U.S. labor movement trains more people every year than any other institution out there. No university does it better. We have highly skilled people. We're putting people through those apprenticeship programs on a regular basis. We're reaching into disadvantaged communities, rural communities, with classes that will help them qualify, get through our entrance exam, and qualify as a career. So there is an ample supply of skilled workers ready, anxious, and willing to go to work.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That Mr. Barletta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Growing up in the road construction business, I learned that private industry needs long-term planning and dedicated funding sources in order to invest in our nation's infrastructure. It's simply a fact that no employer will make plans to hire more workers or purchase $1 million pieces of equipment without long-term security in government contracts. And no state or local government, being a former mayor, can make long-term plans without certainty in federal transportation spending. Do you all agree? That being said, can any of you speak to how uncertainty and short-term fixes to the Highway Trust Fund have impacted your ability to move goods and services around the country? Anyone who wants to take a stab? Mr. Smith.
Well, as has been brought up several times, the population and the commerce of the United States has gone up at a far, far faster rate than the expansion of the interstate, the federal highway system, which is the backbone of our nation's logistics system. 70% of every pound that's moved in the nation's commerce is moved on the highways. That's not to say other modes aren't equally important, but we've allowed the highway system to atrophy for lack of maintenance, and equally important, we've not added to it, and that was the point of me referencing these 20 projects that are out there and that are basically designed. So you can't expect national productivity and economic well-being to improve unless you address these infrastructure issues. And in my mind, it's just a matter of paying for it. I mean, the system's there.
You know, spending on infrastructure, I don't, will grow the economy more than anything that I know. When there's a lot of infrastructure work, people will make good money. There's no question about that. When they make good money, you know what they do? They spend it. They spend it right in our local economies, which helps everyone, not just the construction workers, not just the construction companies, not just the manufacturer of equipments. It helps the waitresses and waiters and little restaurants and diners. It helps everywhere. So it's an investment. And I said it will grow the economy more. So spending on infrastructure is not the same as putting money into another program where you're just providing services. There is a return on that.
And I might just add, I think my numbers are correct. We're now at levels of federal infrastructure spending that have not been seen since 1948 as a percentage of GDP. So it's going to get worse and worse unless the Congress decides to fund these projects. And as I mentioned, the industry that uses these systems, the surface transportation business, has been wholly in support of increasing or adjusting the federal gasoline and diesel taxes for years and replacing them with some sort of new user fee system because of natural gas and electric vehicles that'll use them in the future.
And I agree, the American people are okay paying it as long as they know where it's going, and we make sure that every penny that we take from them is used to the best that we could. Pennsylvania is home to over 120,000 miles of state and local highways, many of them which cross through my district. I know for a fact that of economic development projects that would happen if there was access to our transportation system. There's no question. Can you please explain what role highway accessibility plays in determining where you locate your facilities and how such accessibility affects your ability to efficiently get your goods to the customers?
I'll start, Representative. And we employ about 900 people in your district. We have a chocolate business in Lidditz, and we also have a beef business. So if you think about the traffic that uses the local highways in terms of delivering raw materials, taking the developed product, the chocolate, the beef, and moving it on, it's a significant consideration. Is it the only one? No. And going back to your first comment about do you need absolute certainty? No, but it's a world of volatility and uncertainty and complexity. It is a significant variable, so I would say that we'll invest, despite the uncertainty, but it certainly would help and encourage us in specific locations, knowing there's going to be expanded rail, waterway, or highway access. It would attract our capital to new investment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Barletta. Ms. Norton.
May I thank Chairman Schuster for opening this year by having, I think he's done this before, this across-the-board comprehensive hearing on our nation's infrastructure. And I applaud what this committee has done, very bipartisan committee, not only the Word of Bill, the FAST Act, even when the rest of the country wasn't rest of the Congress has not been moving as rapidly in its own mission. The FAST Act, of course, is the latest version, passed in 2015. And I think the committee deserves the compliments of the committee for passing the first highway transportation bill, comprehensive highway transportation bill in a decade. But I have to tell you that it broke my heart that in order to get even a small bump, that is to say an increase, we had to reduce the bill from a 6-year bill to a 5-year bill. And of course, the bill had to contain a number of gimmicks as well. And that is, even given the best efforts, and I must tell you, extraordinary bipartisan efforts, and there was great agreement on this bill. The present strategy for our infrastructure is delay. That strategy is prohibitively expensive. We are not even doing maintenance. So what it means is that billions of dollars that those who had the guts before us have invested in our transportation infrastructure, which made this country what it is today, that that is crumbling as well. So here's something that I championed and that was done with great bipartisan support in the FAST Act. And it's such a small amount, it makes me blush. But it's a provision that provides $20 million in grants to the states to themselves come up with alternative sources of funds for the Highway Trust Fund. As you know, the Highway Trust Fund, and I ought to, I suppose, give this to Mr. Smith. As you know, the Highway Trust Fund has just been stuck now, and we're doing nothing to replenish it. Mr. Smith, the reason I thought this was a question for you is I noted in your testimony something that surprised me, and I thought was important to note, that FedEx supports a broad mix of revenue sources in order to avoid over-reliance, here I'm quoting you, on a single option. I take it that single option is the one we've been using, which of course will run out even before this bill runs out, the gas tax. In light of the fact that we're asking the states to give us ideas about alternative sources, can I ask you, Mr. Smith, why you think the gas tax alone will not be sufficient, and what kind of alternative sources do you think should be put on the table so that even if we were able to get the Highway Trust Fund with a gas tax, we would have additional sources to get going? Any ideas you have would be much appreciated.
Yes, well, let me give you three, but let me address again the Highway Trust Fund. As I've said a couple of times now, we at FedEx and virtually every entity in the commercial transportation, surface transportation business that I know of supports an increase in gasoline and diesel taxes indexed from the cap that was placed on them in 1994. So having said that, here are three issues. First, the transportation system is moving away from complete reliance on internal combustion engines. There are increasing uses of electric and hybrid electric vehicles, and in the heavy freight area, I was in Oklahoma recently at the ribbon cutting for our new compressed natural gas facility for FedEx Freight. So those two technologies are not captured by today's gasoline and diesel system. There needs to be something, a vehicle mileage tax or some other mechanism to fund use of the federal highway system by those types of vehicles. Second, we are strongly in favor of a revised United States corporate tax code because we're not competitive. I think Mr. Trumka will agree that blue-collar folks need equipment and investment so they can have a high income level, bulldozers, trucks, planes, whatever the case may be. So we're not competitive, and we're particularly not competitive with our global taxation system. We're the only, there's only one other industrialized country in the world, Chile, that has a global tax system. So if we went tomorrow to a global, to a territorial system with some level of taxation to prevent gaming, 8% or whatever the case may be, there would be hundreds of billions of dollars that could come back in this country tomorrow that could provide funding for infrastructure. And the last idea is congestion pricing. I mean, we all know today when you go through a bridge or a tunnel in New York or wherever, you don't have to go up and pay somebody taking the money. We have a little RFID tag there that says you're paid going into Manhattan. That type of technology is cheap, it's available, it's been successfully tested down in southern Florida in order to reduce congestion by putting congestion pricing there, giving you incentives to use high occupancy lanes or to operate in non-congested periods of time. that could be another source of revenue. So those are three.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you,
With
Mr.
that,
Chairman.
With that, Mr. Gibbs is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McClellan, in your testimony, you talked about how important the locks are in our river system, which I agree with you 150%. Are you aware, well, let me back up a second. We are able to get the Homestead Lock and Dam project going forward, got kind of off a different funding source that frees up money for the Lower Mon, the Kentucky, and the Chick locks. And you might not be aware, but I'm sending a letter today to the President Trump and along with about 24 of my colleagues to make sure that they're aware that in the current funding for the Army Corps, the Homestead's taken care of, but the three locks, the three priorities, Lower Mon, Kentucky, and Chick, are not. And we want to make sure they get the funding here in this next few months, because if they don't, they'll be possibly shut down and delayed, and the cost will be, you know, just exponential going up. So I just want to make you aware of that, because I know you, especially at Cargill, understand the importance of our inland waterway system. So, you know, if you have a chance to weigh in with the Trump administration, the importance of that funding, appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for making me aware.
Just want to mention that. Ms. Andringia, in your testimony, you talk about, for manufacturing too, our water infrastructure, being our drinking water, the aging pipes and all that, and you talk about Representative Duncan's private activity bonds lifting the cap. Are you aware that I have a bill, it's H.R. 465, dealing with integrated planning, the EPA, that will help give our local municipalities the flexibility in their planning and their permits to get to their goals where they need to get to, but maybe can't do it in the 5-year permitting, and have an overall goal, which will help get the projects done, but also be more efficient, not the ratepayers that can't pay that. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that there's some other initiatives going on. If you're not aware of that, I don't know if you're aware of the EPA's integrating planning, which they say they support, but they haven't done a lot to get it going. So we're trying to codify it in this legislation.
Well, thank you, and thank you for making me aware of that. And I just, you know, we've talked about a lot of different kinds of infrastructures here this morning, and really they're all vitally important to our economic well-being, and certainly to us as industry, but manufacturers and labor. And the NAM did a comprehensive report really on building to win, and it includes really good data about things like water and wastewater is another one that's important, as well as, you know, the ports and light rail. We haven't talked a whole lot about that. Different transit systems, but of course, roads and bridges and ports are you know, vitally important, and probably the biggest numbers that we need. But I'd also like to say that there's quite a few ideas in here about ways to fund this, and Congresswoman DeFazio, it's some of the same things you mentioned earlier on. And the other thing I just want to say that as manufacturers, and I think you've heard it here, and I feel like we're all preaching to the choir in this room, but we as manufacturers have to invest in our business. You know, my dad was extremely conservative financially. You know, we basically didn't have debt and always tried to finance our own growth. But the one thing that he always said is we have to keep updating our equipment in the plants, our welders, our machining centers, the tools that our employees use.
I fully understand that. I just
Yeah.
want to make it clear
So,
that
anyway, I think
we
what the
need
point is-
funding, but I also want to make it clear there's ways we can be more efficient in doing things, and the integrated planning bill which I introduced is part of
Yeah.
that, at least on
Yeah.
the wastewater side of things. That's one.
Yep. And again, I think manufacturers and those of us here are willing to invest.
Yeah, that's great. Mr. Wallish, if I say it right, in your testimony you mentioned making significant investments in mobility technologies and automated driving and autonomous vehicles. I recently learned that these investments during discussions, in Ohio, we have the Transportation Research Center located in Central Ohio that provide for automotive testing services, and planning to build a winter indoor testing facility. So they've got thousands of acres there now and a lot going on. I'd like to hear any thoughts you might have on how proving grounds and testing centers play a role in developing these new technologies that BMW would be interested in.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, of course, the safety of people driving our vehicles is paramount to us. So we would never go ahead and test cars that are not fully developed with actual consumers. So having said that, we are and will do a whole lot of testing before we have any automated vehicle available to the public. So that might be a thought as well. Yes, we have to test and we have to be quick because that's going to be a technology that's going
I
to
just
be
wanted to
around
bring-
in the next 3 or 4 years.
Highlight that this testing ground we have in Ohio is state-of-the-art, and doing it, an inside testing facility would be beneficial. I want to make sure you're aware of that facility.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you, and my time's up. I yield back.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for holding this hearing, you and the ranking member. I know that every member of this panel is aware that we are in desperate need of making additional investments in order to build up and maintain our crumbling highways and railways and waterways and airport infrastructure. At the same time, we also are dealing with a great deal of technologies, and we're dealing also with non-resilience in materials that we use, which causes us to have to do some projects over and over again. I still await the President's package coming over with a lot of enthusiasm. But I'm very concerned about all of you commenting on how the industry is experiencing changes. One of the things that struck me, I went to Germany to the BMW plant last year, the year before, with the president. And it was a huge plant. It was larger than this complex. But I didn't see 10 people working there. They were all robots. And I wonder, what is that going to have to do with the workforce in this country, and how do we handle it? Any of you had any of those thoughts?
Well, we still have 70,000 people working in that plant you were referencing to, so it's not totally empty.
We walked almost a whole day looking, and I didn't see any. I saw about 10 in the whole plant, and but the number is not nearly as significant as the process, and the and looking toward the future. We also, people think of infrastructure producing a lot of jobs. And in many industries, that is not necessarily the case. And I wonder how it's going to impact your industries as we look at infrastructure. Yes, Mr. Smith.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm optimistic about this. As everybody in this room knows, at the beginning of the last century, about 50% of the population in America was in agriculture. Now there's less than 1.5% of people in this country working in agriculture, and we're producing more agricultural products than we can consume, and it's one of our biggest exports. About 1 in 3 acres in the United States is produced for export. So there are people in the container shipyards handling those exports. There are people in the railroads handling them and so forth. So I'm very confident as things automate in other sectors of the economy, there'll be plenty of good paying jobs as long as our educational system keeps up with it. And in Tennessee, as Congressman Cohen will tell you, we just passed a law, as I understand it, where any student in the state can go to junior college for free. And that will be the bedrock of people learning new skills to operate in these different environments. I have been to BMW in Germany, and where all those people that Ludwig is talking about, they're not on the factory floor, but they're up in the offices doing design and computers and designing the robots and things of that nature. So as long as we have a climate where business wants to invest in the United States and an educational system that supports people being trained for these new technologies, I'm very confident things will be okay. In our industry, for instance, I don't think we're going to go to fully autonomous trucks, but I do think we will go to trucks where the truck driver becomes much more productive. They'll have an autopilot. It'll be safer, fewer accidents. They may have a robot truck following it that allows them to operate. And I think that's the trajectory that'll go on, will go on as long as we incent investment and we have the proper educational systems to support it.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Before we
Thank you.
go,
I was just
Mr.
getting
Mr.
started.
Cohen has a,
Thank you. Since my name was mentioned, I want to thank Mr. Smith for the reference to junior college. All of that money is from the state lottery that you helped me, after 18 years of effort, push across the line to fund that. Thank you, and thank you, Tennessee, for the state lottery.
thanks for the commercial. Mr. Webster's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. Mr. Smith, you brought up Florida. I'm from Florida, and the toll facilities down in Miami-Dade up to Fort Lauderdale, which are just on the interstate system. But there are several local expressway authorities that charge tolls on their roads, all the roads they build. Then we have the Florida Turnpike Enterprise, which is goes through the center of our state, and I'm sure your trucks use those. Do you think that, especially the ones with the flexible congestion type tolling, where it goes up and down, which is a good Republican idea, pay for what you get, do you think the federal government should get involved in tolls? We have local toll roads, we have state-run toll roads. Do you think they should get in that? Is that a way to enhance the revenue?
Yes, as I was saying to Ms. Norton, as we move to more natural gas heavy trucks and more electric and hybrid vehicles on the highway, you're not going to have gasoline or diesel taxes to fund the federal highway system. So the most productive system in our mind is some sort of RFID system that allows you to collect a user fee for those types of vehicles to use the federal system. Once you've got that system in place, which is very simple with today's technology, that's why I use the example of going through the tunnels in New York. Nobody even pays any attention to it anymore. So it can also be used for congestion pricing and to incent people to have more occupants in a vehicle. So you can get a lot of productivity out of our transportation system. And I might point out, Congressman, that we've been operating 33-foot twin trailers in Florida for years very productively, and our drivers tell us they're safer, and that reduces traffic on your highways, both federal and the state-funded divided highways you have down there.
Yes, I remember in olden days when I was in the state legislature, we approved that, and it was good. I also would say then, I was just saying, do you think that it would best be done by the federal government to use that as opposed to state or local? I mean, state and local do things that are local. They try to improve their, but in the end, how about if there were dedicated freight traffic roads that were paid for through tolls? Is that something you'd be in favor of?
Absolutely. It would take a lot of trucks off the road, and but having said that, I think you can get an awful lot of productivity on our existing, expanded, and improved highway system doing the things that I just mentioned to you. You don't have to have dedicated truck lanes, but that would certainly be something that could be looked at. As to state versus federal, I don't think it makes that much difference, provided there is a dominant design. There's a common technology standard that allows the VMT to be administered the same in Florida as it is in California or Connecticut or what have you. That's the main thing right there.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, first off on ATC and ATC reform, some folks have said that to privatize the system, the reason to do that is because airlines aren't receiving enough next-gen benefits. But I know in Memphis there's been some investment in next-gen, and FedEx, I believe, has directly benefited from that investment in next-gen. Could you just cover that for us?
Sure. We were the prototype location for a next-gen application, which allowed us to narrow the separation between landing and aircraft, landing aircraft and aircraft taking off. It's been a spectacular success. It's improved the productivity of the FedEx operation there, saved tens of millions of gallons of fuel, allowed us to serve our customers more efficiently and keep on time. A next-gen application nationwide, but particularly in the Northeast, which is the linchpin of the whole ATC system because of the population density and the proximity of major airports one to another. There's the opportunity to vastly improve the productivity of the nation's air traffic control system with the types of technologies that we demonstrated and prototyped at our major hub in Memphis, Tennessee. And I might add something here that's a little known fact. In terms of the number of customs entries, not tonnage, because sea freight obviously carries more tonnage than air cargo, but the largest port in terms of customs entries in the United States of America is Memphis, Tennessee, where our super hub is. Yeah. And the productivity of that hub and the commerce of the United States, because of those improvements in ATC pioneered by FedEx with the FAA in Memphis, has vastly improved the productivity, not just of Memphis, but the entire national economy.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Chairman, I think you didn't reset my clock. I think there was a minute 30 and...
Mr. Larson, I just looked at it and said, that was 5 minutes?
Yeah, I know it seems like a long
put me to
time when I'm
sleep.
speaking. Yeah, yeah.
No, I don't think his clock was reset, Adam.
All right, so I got about 3 minutes or so. Yeah.
Give 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. I noticed. Thanks. Ms. Trumka, in your written testimony you discussed this, but you didn't really cover it in your oral testimony. Can you talk about the sort of the marriage of workforce development and apprenticeships with infrastructure investment, and maybe a lesson for us as we approach infrastructure investment?
We believe that we have the best skilled workforce in the world. We train more people every year. We bring people out of the neighborhood to be able to create a very, very, very effective workforce. Infrastructure, we think, is really a job creator for this country. How it's financed will have an effect on how important or how widespread the job creation is. If Buy America provision is expanded, and we think it should, it will have a greater impact on the number of jobs that are created. If more waivers are created, then taxpayers' dollars will be used to drive down wages and encourage outsourcing. That's why on all the types of funding that we look at, private partnerships, for instance, have a limited applicability here because they need a revenue source, so they won't apply to repair and maintenance. They won't do much in the rural areas. And if they do come about in those limited areas, we would need to see 13C protection, Davis-Bacon protection, domestic preferences, protection for rail and public sector workers, so that those public dollars aren't used to drive down wages and actually suppress the economy and dampen the economy, but actually grow it. So how you do it is important. We are full scale behind infrastructure because, as every witness here has said, our country depends on it, our competitiveness depends on it, and we're anxious to get started and put people back to work.
Thanks. Mr. Vilish, in talking about road sensors and markings and such, you know, we talk about building roads, bridges, highways. We don't talk about painting lines on the road usually. But what you're essentially saying, I guess, is that we need to be to support automated vehicles, we need to be rethinking a little bit the definition of infrastructure to support autonomous vehicles. Is that true? And then does BMW have something more complete that you can offer the committee? Not in your answer, but just maybe for us to read later.
It's not really that complicated. We just need continuous marking. and that should be there anyway. So it's not that we have to have a special thing for automatic driving. It's just, you know, that the marking is continuing on the roadside and in the middle.
Yeah.
So it's not a really
that
specific
simple, huh?
BMW. Yeah, it really is that simple.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. With that, Mr. Massey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just received some great news yesterday in Kentucky, but it's going to present another transportation infrastructure challenge to us. The Amazon Prime Air announced they're going to put their hub at the CVG airport. And I would just say to Mr. Smith, we've got UPS and we've got DHL as well in Kentucky. You're welcome to come over anytime. It's a challenge we'd love to face, but the challenge that it presents is how do you use the existing infrastructure, or how do you upgrade it, and how do you pay for it so that you can accommodate growth like that? You know, with UPS, DHL, and now Amazon Prime Air hub there, all feeding into I-71 and I-75, which are interstates that haven't changed a lot. The bridge they crossed, the Brent Spence Bridge, was built 50 years ago, before any of that logistics infrastructure for North America was moved to Kentucky. And so now we're dealing with this. And I would say there's not a person here today, you know, testifying that isn't affected by that corridor, the I-71, I-75 corridor. But the real challenge, to Mr. DeFazio's point, is how do you pay for it? Because we know in northern Kentucky and southern Ohio, we need a bridge. We're debating about where the next bridge goes. The bridge that's there, thankfully, was built with American engineers and American labor and American steel. So the reason that it's obsolete is it just can't carry the traffic that's there. So we need another bridge. We're having a robust debate about where that bridge should go and how to pay for it. Mr. DeFazio had some good ideas, I think, and it scares me every time I agree with somebody on the other side of the aisle. You know, I like that he's in favor of user taxes instead of taxes per se, user fees instead of taxes. But before I go back to my red district and ask them to index the fuel tax to inflation and costs, I need to convince them it's a real user fee and that the money's not being leaked out for other things that where there are users who aren't paying a fee. For instance, bike paths, beautification, mass transit. If we could convince them that all the incremental money that's going into that fund is actually going to the infrastructure for the users that are paying for it, I think it'd be a much easier sell. So I would just, you came a little ways toward me, I'm coming a little ways toward you. And also on the passenger facility charge, I think you're onto something there. There's two ways airports are funded. There's a tax that comes to the federal government, and then they ask, Mother, may I? And we dole them back out the money. But there's another way with the passenger facility charge where they have local control and decide how to spend that money. So I would go you one better and say, why don't we just get rid of the passenger facility charge cap and let the airports decide? And then they wouldn't need to come to the federal government and ask for their taxes back. So what do you think of that? If I yield to the ranking member.
I've just advocated a small increase. I think that.
Oh, I don't want to increase. I want to take the cap off.
That would be a market-based approach in a sense. And but I think I can hear the screams coming from downtown from the other. I mean, now you're, you know, we're not just talking a couple of bucks. I mean, who knows? I mean, it might get up to a tenth the cost of putting your bag in the overhead.
Let's test the free market. But I did want to point out one of the benefits of serving on multiple committees is you see there might be solutions to problems that aren't all within one committee. I serve on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and I found out there we've spent $100 billion building Afghanistan, not on military funding, rebuilding Afghanistan. And the Inspector General tells us the infrastructure we're building there is crumbling the day it's built. A lot of it, not all of it. And it's $100 billion. We're on the hook for $10 billion more over there. I'd love to bring that over here and spend it on projects that are going to benefit users in America. Finally, I've got a few seconds here. I want to ask, Mr. Smith mentioned the regulation on the length of the trailers. Are there other regulations, Mr. Smith, that we could lift that would let you use the existing infrastructure more effectively?
Well, I'm sure that there are some out there, but none that compare with the instant improvement in productivity of the 33-foot twin trailers. That's
Mr. Village, do you have some regulations you'd like to see lifted?
Not really what we would say there's one specific one. No.
Just all of them?
All of them, but what we need is consistent. We need rules and regulations throughout the nation. This is what we need, and we need to have that consistently, that we have a consistent planning basis.
Ms. Andringer?
Yeah, on regulations, I would say, I think it's just important to know that, like for manufacturers, we've just had a lot of regulations coming our way. And just to be able to keep up with compliance, again, mid-sized companies, small companies, it's really hard to have the experts sometimes in your business, so you have to go find those people. So you can make sure that you keep up with all the regulations. We bought a software system a couple years ago just to track all the new regulations that were happening every day. And we would see 100 to 200 new regulations every day. Now, maybe only 5 to 10 of those really applied to us, but it still takes time to filter through them and to understand them. And I know manufacturers did a comprehensive study on compliance and the cost of compliance, and some of those definitely would connect with our infrastructure. And it's anywhere from, depending on the size of your company, from $10,000 to $30,000 per employee per year to comply with regulations. So I would say we just need to make sure that the regulations we have are consistent, and I think across state lines, but that we also just, make it possible for our companies to be able to comply with regulations.
Gentleman's time
Mr.
has
Chairman.
expired. Thank you, Mr. Massey. Mr. Capuano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to go on record to say that whenever Mr. Massey agrees with us, we get nervous too. To the panel, when everything's said and done, everybody agrees we need to do something. We all know that. That's kind of like the easy, lowest hanging fruit there is. But there's a minor little point. You all run businesses or large organizations. Somebody's got to pay for this. And the question I have, really, and Mr. Smith, to my knowledge, I've been listening to most of everything that's said, not everything. I think you're the only one who suggested a way, other than spending the harbor maintenance fund, which I think is kind of ridiculous that we have to make that argument. The tax have been paid, it's sitting there. But absent that, I'm of the impression that everybody on the panel at least implied that you believe we need to put more money into the system. Now, we're talking about highways, but I want to be real clear. I believe in harbors are critically important, rail is critically important, and transit is critically important, because even if you're not moving goods through transit, your people are moving through transit, especially in the urban areas. All that being said, we need more money. Mr. Smith, you've made some suggestions, and I want to be real clear. Thus far, the smoke signals coming out of the new administration is somehow we're going to do this with just public-private partnerships. No new money. Now, I co-chaired a group looking at public-private partnerships with Mr. Duncan last year, and we came to a unanimous, bipartisan conclusion that they have a role, and they're good, but they're no better than maybe 10% of our needs. So my question for you is, first of all, do you agree that public-private partnerships can't do it all, can't even do most of it? And if so, I would like to hear your suggestions. Mr. Smith, you already answered this part. Your suggestions of where you think we should get the money. Because I will tell you that, I think it was about 3 years ago, we had the president of the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, sit in that chair and tell us the Chamber of Commerce supported an increase in the gas tax. So for me, that was my first time ever agreeing with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But at the same time, I'd love to find a way, if I'm open to any way to fund this. And Mr. Smith, do you think that public-private partnerships can do all of this?
No, I think it is something that could do some things, but what needs to happen is to increase the gasoline and diesel taxes, which haven't been increased, the federal ones that hadn't been increased since 1994.
Have you told this to the new administration?
Yes, of course.
Have you told this to my friends on the other side?
Well, I hope they're listening
just
right
did.
now, so.
Wake up, guys, wake
But-
up.
But the answer to the question, yes, I told it to
Thank
the
you.
administration as late as yesterday.
Beautiful,
And
thank
then
you.
secondarily, that I think we should move to some sort of RFID-based vehicle mileage.
You have no arguments with me on any of these. I'm completely open. Mr. McLennan, do you think the public-private partnerships can do the whole thing? And
No,
if not,
I don't. So
where do
I
you
think
think
it's,
we should get the money?
So I'm not the tax policy expert. I mean, that's the crux of the
answer.
issue, isn't it? It's a big spend. We've talked about the benefits that it brings to the economy, to jobs. So it's got to be some combination of private-public partnerships, effective tax policy, and also we would say that it's got to be balanced. But the users of the systems, whether it's rivers, roads, railroads, got to have some skin in the game. So there's got to be
Love it.
multiple constituents.
Have you expressed that to the administration? Have they asked?
I have not been invited to.
Well,
to
neither have
express
I,
the
so,
opinion.
you know.
I think you'll get invited before I will.
I wouldn't count on that. Mr. Willicks, what about you? Do you think the P3s can do it all, or do you think that we need to increase revenues?
Experience tells you not. It cannot do that, but otherwise I can tell you a lot about developing cars or producing cars or distributing cars, but I'm not a tax expert either, so I would limit my contribution here to those three fields rather than talking about.
That's fair enough. Ms. Andringa, what do you think?
Yes, thank you. Concur with my colleagues that it has to be in all of the above. That's what we talk about as manufacturers. We're going to need the gas tax, user fees. We're going to need public-private partnerships, maybe bonding, infrastructure bank. And the thing that, I think we just want to remember is the stimulus package that happened in 2009, I think. I think a lot of us thought more money would go to infrastructure in
So
that
did we.
package, and it was like less than 10%. Now, there were other reasons, and we were in a different economic situation, but I think what's really important is that whatever package, bold package I hear coming from this group, it does have to be, it really has to be used for what it was intended to be
Totally
used
agree.
for.
Mr. Trump, I actually know your answer, but you should put it on the record anyway.
No, we don't. We think partnerships have, public-private partnerships have a limited applicability because they need a revenue source. And in fact, if you're going to attract public capital or private capital, that's dependent on having a government source of stream of revenue involved. And unless you can show that on a regular basis, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years out, then private capital is not going to get involved, even for the small percentage of the jobs that they could do. We would support an increase in the gas tax. We think it should have been indexed for inflation years ago. We would also agree with my friend at the end of the table that it ought to be broadened to capture those as changing technology goes by, to capture more of those people, so that as electric cars and other forms of transportation that use highways and use the infrastructure in place but skip out on it, they should be paying their fair share as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to go on record saying I love this panel. Thank you for having them.
I'm glad we made you happy, Mr. Capuano. With that, Governor Sanford's recognized.
Two quick thoughts. One, I think it's important to give credit where credit's due, and with regard to BMW, I think it needs to be remembered the timeful that they came to South Carolina. It was 20 years ago. Textile industry was shifting out of our state. Manufacturing had been hit incredibly hard, and people were hurting. And BMW made a bet on our state. And they really they were the leaders in bringing in a new era of sort of advanced manufacturing. And so in its wake, Volvo and Boeing and a whole lot of others have come, but it was BMW that started that ball rolling, and I think it's important that I acknowledge that. I think what's also interesting, though, is from the standpoint of global capital allocation, you made a bet in part based on market share and entry into the United States market, but I think going back to, in essence, the conversation we've been having with regard to infrastructure and how you stay competitive, the question is, would you make that decision today? And if there was one single thing, as you compare investing in India versus China versus the United States, what would be the one thing that you would change?
Very clearly, we would make the same decision today. And just let me say that just by our largest investment of $1 billion additionally, we've now spent about $7.5 billion. We created almost another 1,000 jobs. So I think more or less we would do the same thing today again, and we would be at the same location with the proximity to the harbor of Charleston. I don't think we would change. Maybe we would think about our start, which was a little rough in the first 2 years, but otherwise we would do the same again.
I thank you. Then let me extend this question over to you, Mr. Smith. You've been a visionary for a long time. You've been ahead of the curve, whether that's submitting a business plan in business school that was not exactly seen as the way to go, but you seem to be able to look around the corner. And I would ask you the same question with regard to competitiveness. You mentioned some good ideas, whether that's congestion pricing or territorial taxes. If you were, let's say, Donald Trump, and you look at this notion of being a chief executive in this country, and you look at, again, capital allocation, how do we attract and retain more in the way of capital that leads to investment and jobs? Are there a couple of other things that we haven't talked on today, or as you look around the corner at what comes next, are there things that jump out at you that you'd say, as a committee, you all ought to think about X or Y? And let me throw in one last thought on that question. I think that one of the things that some of us struggle with regard to tax is not just a knee-jerk reaction to a tax increase, but rather this notion of Thomas Friedman's flat world and how indeed competitive the global marketplace is. And so if you look at CBO numbers, what they show is that deficits are projected to increase rather dramatically. And that's in sort of a best-case scenario. What's interesting is, in essence, a deficit is simply a tax. It's a deferred tax. It's handed to the next generation, but it's a tax. So taxes are already going up. And so what a number of us struggle with is not a knee-jerk reaction to a gas tax or other things, but how do we retain competitiveness if overall our tax environment begins to look less competitive than some of the other choices that FedEx or BMW or other places have around the globe? Any pearls of wisdom or thoughts on that front?
Well, assuming that regulations become more efficient, which the president started to do with his executive order the other day, and you just heard an example down here of a wonderful business overwhelmed with regulations. But the single most important thing the United States could do to be more competitive is to lower the corporate tax rate for C corporations. The top 1,000 corporations in America make 50% of all CapEx, capital investments. Those are the tools that I was talking about that make our blue-collar workforce more productive and able to earn more. And in the same time that happens, we should go to a territorial tax system with some sort of appropriate tax rate to keep from gaming the system. I saw the other day Chairman Ryan talking about this suggested border adjustability tax being equivalent to a VAT. It's not. Mexico has both a corporate income tax, much lower than us, and a border adjustable VAT, which everybody sees and is eliminated at the border. C corporations pay about $300 billion in taxes. If you lowered the corporate tax rate and went to a territorial system, I have no doubt from talking to CEOs in industries around this country, CapEx, GDP goes up, tax receipts would increase. The top 5,000 C corporations make 95% of the capital investments in this country. You can't apply the same rates to C corps to pass-throughs. And that's the problem. That's what's driving this border adjustability concept. If you're a pass-through, a subchapter S, an LLC, and you want the corporate tax rate, then you can reincorporate it as a C. And when you take that money out, you pay whatever the personal income tax rate is. But retained earnings in C corporations are the feedstock of tomorrow. And the only way to pay those bills without increasing the deficit is increased GDP.
Thank you. Thanks, Governor. Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, and everybody on the panel, I'd like to refer to that saying up there. According to the system of natural liberty, the sovereign has only 3 duties to attend to: The third one, the duty of erecting and maintaining certain public works and certain public institutions, which it can never be for the interest of any individual or small number of individuals, and to erect and maintain, etc. That said, I hear what you have said in regard to the maintenance of bridges, roads, all of that. Do you know that the Army Corps of Engineers has $40 billion construction backlog, $20 billion operations and maintenance backlog, and appropriated only $4.5 million this year? Makes sense to you? Would you do that to your company? Anybody? So I would, in all fairness to the administration, ask you to pose to them the question of whether we can continue on this road of not funding those that maintain the areas which you have a great interest in. Am I correct? Any comments? Mr. Trumka, I'm very happy to say that take my hat off to the best workers that you have. They are recognized worldwide for their professionalism. And I hope that we understand that you build to last, that you do your work so that everybody knows that when a union person has done it, there is no change order. There is no backlog on things to go back and change. In regard to the increase, Mr. Smith, there is current understanding that the electric batteries are now holding more. You are going to CNG. Are you considering going to electricity?
We have a number of all-electric and hybrid electric vehicles in our local pickup and delivery operations. Those are generally lighter trucks. In the heavy truck sector, we are converting a significant amount of our infrastructure over to compressed natural gas. Neither of those are picked up in the current federal gasoline and diesel excise tax, and so there would have to be a different system to pick up over-the-road operations of personal automobiles and heavier trucks that are natural gas powered. That's why I suggested the RFID solution.
All right, the gas mileage is an issue. We've been debating of how we can collect more taxes from those that have electric vehicles or CNG. Somehow, we've been on this conversation for years. We have yet to come to an agreement. Will you have any suggestions?
Well, again, if you want to build infrastructure, it would be a relatively simple task with today's technologies to build an RFID reader system throughout our federal highway system. A small tag, just like you have when if you're a regular user going through the tunnels in New York that read when you pass by and send you a bill on your credit card. I mean, that should be an integral part of infrastructure spending to develop an alternative electronic system that allows users to help pay for the system.
It's easier for you to say you tried trying to come to an agreement.
No, I understand. I've been testifying in this exact room for 43 years, so I've watched y'all very closely for many, many years. And over the last 25 or 30 years, I think the whole conversation of this committee has been the inability of people that are in the Congress to support payment streams for things that we have to have. I mean, that is the issue. It's not any failure to recognize we've got a problem here. It's an unwillingness to provide the funding to fix it.
Precisely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Woodall is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It has to be said, according to Mr. Smith's testimony, the first packages went out in April of 1973. So if 44 years ago business opened and you've been dragged in front of this committee for the last 43 of those years, we have some bigger problems that we need to work on together here, Mr. Chairman, or that's just a show of respect to the generations of Schusters that have led this organization here.
Seems like I've been testifying before Schusters for a long time.
I believe that. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you doing this panel to get us started this year. This is full of American success stories, each and every one. I certainly count the BMW success story as an American success story. I was going to school in South Carolina in 1992 when that announcement was made, and the sense of hope and optimism that BMW brought to that South Carolina community cannot be overstated, and the need for that hope and optimism today cannot be overstated. I represent the great state of Georgia, and of course, our port in Brunswick is a large exporter of your product. At once upon a time, more product per production, more product was exported from that plant in South Carolina than any other automotive plant in this country. Is that still the case? Do you know?
At least I have knowledge that it was the case in 2015.
I drive that point home because folks talk about infrastructure and getting goods to market and people building plants in America because that's where the consumers are. I want to talk about the fact that we have the best workers in the nation, on the planet, that are teamed up with the best infrastructure in the world that lead to those kinds of exports. And I would love to have an export-driven economy instead of a consumption-driven economy. And I appreciate what BMW does to help make that happen. Mr. Smith, I wanted to ask you about open skies. I saw it on the tail end of your testimony. Undoubtedly, competition is the key to making sure that we're all doing the very best we can. Competition is good for McDonald's and Burger King. It's good for politicians, and it's good for aviation. But I do worry about unfair competition, and I hear from our domestic carriers not that they want a special carve-out to prevent competition, but they want a level playing field so that they can have fair competition. In your testimony, it seemed to suggest that you dismissed their concerns as wanting a special carve-out instead of a level playing field. Could you speak to that just for a moment?
Well, no, sir. I don't dismiss the concerns of the three major passenger carriers at all. I would simply point out, as I have over and over again, there is a specific process and a provision in existing law that requires them to file a complaint. The reason they won't file that complaint is because they will not be able to demonstrate harm. Why won't they be able to demonstrate harm? Because they don't fly to the Middle East. And what they're trying to do through their opposition of open skies is to force travelers from Southeast Asia, India, and Africa to go over their code partners or on their systems through Western Europe as opposed to going through the hubs in the Middle East. So if they want to have this fight, there's a provision to do that. They won't file under the existing provision to let everything see the light of day. So we don't support their position because of their refusal to do that.
They will undeniably being able to demonstrate that unlevel playing field is critical. I remember back in 2012, FedEx had that same concern about subsidies in the postal marketplaces around the globe, demonstrated that concern. I want to see those concerns demonstrated and eliminated, and I hope Secretary Chao is going to be able to give an open ear to that. FedEx is an amazing success story. You as an individual are an amazing American success story, and I am certain that keeping a level playing field is going to be that foundation on which we build more American success stories. Mr. Trumka, I wanted to comment on part of your testimony. Folks don't get to see your testimony written. They just listen to it. It's your overarching principles there at the very end. Number one, you could have listed anything as number one, and you said number one, overarching principle is a program must include investments that are as transformative in the 21st century as railroads, highways, telephones, radio, and television electrification were in previous centuries. I just couldn't agree with you more. I get so tired of nibbling around the edges, and I don't see a hunger back home for maintaining roads. Folks believe that's the lowest part of the bar. Of course we're going to do that. Of course we're going to keep our commitment to that. What are we going to do to transform ourselves going forward? And I say that coming from not particularly unionized part of the world down there in Georgia, of all the things we can partner on, all the great American success stories that are there. I just want you to know how much it means to me. First hearing out of the gate, we're talking about what we can do, golly, to be as transformative in the 21st century as those accomplishments were you mentioned in the 20th. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having an opportunity for us to celebrate what we agree on.
And you brought up my father's name, so whenever he brought it up, I got to impart some Schuster knowledge. So there's been a Schuster on this committee as long as FedEx has been in existence, so we're glad to be able to work with you. Thanks. And I hope your time in front of me was more pleasant than in front of my father, because I know how tough that can be. Ms. Titus is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I greatly respect your 43 years, Mr. Smith. I've been here now, I'm in my 4th term, and I have a similar experience. Nothing really has changed over those years except my seat has moved back a little bit. We're having the same conversation, same rhetoric, need to fix the infrastructure. We got a score of D- on the engineer's infrastructure report card. All the options are on the table. We need to look at this. It's just a matter of paying for it. But there's no substantive plan. I commend the ranking member for trying to put out something on paper to say this is how we can fix it. But there's no plan. It's just a little dibs and dabs here and there. Everybody agrees we need to do something. Well, that's not going to get the job done. We've also heard a lot about maintenance of infrastructure, but I can tell you in the West and in my state of Nevada, where you've had rapid growth and development, there's a tremendous challenge there too. It's not so much repair and maintenance, but it's providing access. If you look at Nevada, we are $285 million shortfall every year for the next 10 years just to build state highways alone. So we've got to do something. Actually, my question goes to Mr. Trumka. I'd like to ask him what he thinks about the suggestion that all our ills will be solved if we just give more corporate tax breaks to the big companies. And then my second question, going back to the conversation about the public-private partnerships, how you would address those in terms of labor agreements, employment agreements. You know, everybody talks about those as though there are hundreds of them out there. There's really only a handful. And I can tell you that in Nevada, where they're doing Project Neon, which is the big interstate project right downtown, they looked at doing one of these P3 agreements and decided it made no sense financially or from a maintenance and management perspective and backed away from it. So would you address those two questions for me?
I certainly will. A lot of talk has been had about repatriation, first of all, and that, of course, is a lump sum revenue source one time. Previous repatriation plans have disadvantaged U.S. companies by giving tax breaks to their offshore counterparts. We would oppose any kind of tax system that encouraged or rewarded outsourcing off the country. Further, any action on repatriation should not reward those who game the system by granting them overly low tax rates. So we would end the deferrals. We would be willing to look at a lot of different things, including border adjustment taxes, things of that sort, that would actually encourage production here, encourage manufacturing here. But we don't think that just cutting taxes is a solution, because in many instances we can show you where low taxes have done nothing, and some of the biggest companies that have paid no taxes have still continued to offshore things. With regard to the private partnership stuff, how would we take care of that? First of all, they're of limited access and limited use. They require a revenue source, and so repair and maintenance jobs, things of that sort, and even in the rural areas where the revenue source would be low, are never going to get built. If you do them, and there are instances where we could see working with them, you still need to have the protections of 13C, Davis-Bacon, domestic preferences, protections for rail and public sector workers, and we would increase the Buy American provisions of that as well, so that in fact those tax dollars, even the private sector dollars, are used to increase jobs here at home and increase our economy rather than drive down the wages of Americans here. We're willing to look at and work with people on a lot of different funding sources, but blindly saying all you have to do is reduce the income tax on corporations and everything will be fine simply doesn't square with reality.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Lamalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for convening this, and indeed a very good cross-section of interest on this fine panel today of representing a lot of what America is looking at for its transportation and materials transporting needs. So when first time on this committee here, and I'm excited about it. I hear a lot of conversation going on here about the different aspects of how we're going to accomplish things, and I want to always remember that when I hear maybe a little is being done to get the funding, well, a lot is being done every day by every American family in paying the way for all of this, whether it's the gas taxes they fuel up or the tax on tires, as well as the excise taxes that come along the way, and then on the products that they purchase. When a truck is carrying that, if you got it, a truck brought it, but a truck paid to get it there, as well as rail and ports. So there's a lot of ways people are already paying for this, and I think what really needs to have a lot more attention paid to it is that are we doing things as efficiently as we can with the dollars we have? Are the dollars being channeled into transportation infrastructure that people are paying at the pump? Interesting discussion on ports a little bit earlier. I don't know all the background on that particular port fee that isn't being paid completely towards using it for ports, so need to learn. But that's a great discussion. But people, when they're paying it, they certainly want to see those dollars get into the infrastructure and not go somewhere else. So I'm from California. I'm from the ag business myself and surrounded by many people that are in agriculture, whether it's grain or fruit, nut crops, hay crops, you name it, timber industry. So they're very interested in a lot of the port aspects as well. And being on the West Coast, it's getting pretty tough with the port system we have there, with the load we have, and we saw ag products suffer quite a bit just a couple of years ago when things weren't moving very well through the ports. So we're glad to see that moving well. A strong bipartisan effort in this town helped to overcome some of those challenges. So we need to keep that going. But we have issues with our ports, dredging that needs to be done to keep the ports in Northern California moving well. We got to overcome the obstacles. And sometimes I see a lot going on with getting permitting done to do anything, and on port maintenance, adding highway infrastructure. I'm in the rice business, okay, and so when I saw it's not that many years ago, they were going to infringe on a rice field, pay the farmer for the land that was being taken in order to build up an overcrossing and a clover leaf. They were also concerned about the mitigation for the rice land, because they look at that as habitat. Now that's someone's private property, but they were worried about mitigating the land that was in a rice field, and that just kind of blew my mind as a rice grower. That now so there's a lot of hang-ups on just getting these projects done, and so when I'm looking at how the folks in my district are especially going to be interested in what further can be done to, and I would point this to Mr. McLennan, if you don't mind on that. What do you see as far as our rail system being able to get some of these products to ports and trucking, but the main thing being the port aspects of moving sometimes very perishable products timely through those, and so we can remain competitive on the West Coast as well as the whole nation.
Yeah, as you pointed out, Representative, the port congestion in this country is the worst on the West Coast. And so when you have the congestion in the port facilities, it backs up the whole system. And to your point, it creates all kinds of damages, losses relative to the value of the produce. It impacts export markets. So I think, whether it's dredging or increasing facilities for barges along the riverways, as I mentioned, safety, but your particular district, or not necessarily your district, but California in particular, is in the most need relative to port facility improvement, which will improve our trade and our overall commerce and the livelihood of the farmers.
And what do you see are roadblocks that we can handle in government that don't necessarily mean, you know, an additional fee or a rate hike or something? What are some of the roadblocks we could be doing that would be using the dollars we have in our system?
Well, we've got the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund is the quick answer. I mean, we've got billions there in the taxes that have been collected, you know, waiting to be spent. So I think I would focus on that first, is getting the funding into the system, and through a variety, whether it's public-private partnerships or, you know, the projects that are already underway that's been pointed out in committee from the Army Corps of Engineers, we're ready to go. We need the funding.
I get concerned about permitting as well, because there's,
Yep.
you know, let's get the work done, let's get the people to work doing the work that want to, and.
Got to have the efficiency.
Yep, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio, for holding this important meeting. I'm a new member of this committee, and I look forward to working with both of you and the entire committee to provide a 21st century infrastructure for our 21st century businesses and communities. Thanks to all of the witnesses who have testified here today. I am the founder of the Florida Ports Caucus and the chair of the Florida Ports Caucus, and we do a lot of work with ports. But when I first arrived to Congress, I would go to the floor every day, and my mantra for Congress would be jobs, jobs, jobs. And I was concerned because we were unable to pass a jobs bill. And I had two great jobs bills that would create jobs, because I believe that if we employ everyone in our country, then we would have a better country. We wouldn't have so many people looking to government for help. Everyone would be working. In my opinion, I think that I want to ask a question, first of all, to Mr. Smith, and I want to first thank him for creating so many good jobs in my district for my constituents. I represent Miami-Dade County, which is home to several FedEx shipping centers and the significant regional hub for Latin America and the Caribbean, which we were happy to tour. I want to also acknowledge you for the diversity of your workforce. I was able to tour your operation in Paris, thanks to my dear friend, your Senior Vice President, Gina Adams. It was an extraordinary experience. In your written testimony, you warned that FedEx would not be able to continue to help grow the economy and create jobs without improved infrastructure. And I was happy to hear you mention education. I'm a former school principal, so I know how important it is for children to be educated to take the next level of jobs that we create. Could you please elaborate on the impact of delayed infrastructure investment on your company and sector? And also, you said that you believe user fees would help. And are you interested, or would you approve higher user fees to get this done? Because everything is stuck.
Well, the answer to the last question is yes, we would support higher fees, and as I've mentioned several times, we've supported an increase in the federal gasoline and diesel tax to do that. Let me give you one factoid which will just bring this in perspective. All of us know what it's like to buy a tire for our car. Over the past 20 years, our over-the-road vehicle tire utilization has been cut in half. So we're using almost 100% more tires to produce the same mileage of transportation. Why is that? Because the road infrastructure has so many potholes in it, it's tearing up tires faster than what was the case before. The congestion, Mr. DeFazio's clock up there is a real cost to business and a real cost to consumers. The cost of congestion is getting worse. It's preventing time-certain deliveries, which are important for things for hospitals and things of that nature. So there's a cost to the public, there's a cost to FedEx, there's a cost to UPS, there's a cost to Cargill by delaying these expansions and required upgrades and maintenance of the highway system. So thanks for your job as a teacher. My brother was a teacher. After parent, it's the most important job in the country, in my opinion.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Trumka, in your written testimony, you mentioned reducing poverty and inequality as a guiding principle for infrastructure investment. In your opinion, what infrastructure investments and policy reforms would best support poverty reduction?
I think there's two facets to that answer. One is we talked about automation and new technology, and that's always been important for a dynamic economy, and it's important in transportation. But that said, we can't use technology as an excuse to ignore the costs to workers, communities, and safety. If anything, technology should be used to combat inequality, not to ignore or accelerate the problem. And so one point I would make is, as this committee looks forward, you ought to strike, I look forward to working with you so that we can strike the right balance between workers' safety and progress. The system sometimes locks people out, and so we have to get them skills at the lower level. We've started in our apprenticeship program going back and doing remedial courses, offering remedial courses so that applicants have the necessary math skills, writing skills, reading skills, English skills to be able to pass our entrance exam and get into the community, make sure everybody has that opportunity. Also, if you do public-private partnerships and you don't follow the protections of 13C and Davis-Bacon and domestic preferences and all of those things, tax dollars will be used to drive down wages, which will increase poverty in a lot more areas. And so we would guard against those as well. And the projects ought to be spread through the country so that there's a geographical look at it, so that rural Americans are getting a shot at some of the jobs and some of the better infrastructure, and thus then looking more attractive to business to come into some of those rural areas. And we would urge the committee to look at that geographical spread so that a large segments of Americans aren't just locked out, that we don't just do this in populous areas, but we look at the rural areas as well.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Lewis from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming today. It's very important that we hear from the experts in the field and doing the tough work. I represent a district in Minnesota that is primarily suburban, primarily automotive dependent. We've got a couple of major interstate arterials through our district, 35 and 35E, and congestion is always a problem. Over 78% of the citizens in that district commute by car alone. If you add in pools, it's 87%. So that's very high on our agenda. But Mr. Trumka said something interesting not long ago, and it's how we invest matters. And when I look at this, and I think when the committee looks at this, I hope that we're going to look at the investments that have the greatest return. We all know that productivity is the key to rewarding both labor and capital. It's not a zero-sum game. If we're more productive, everybody benefits. So let me ask you, and let's start with my Minnesota friend, Mr. McClellan, I should say. What do you think when we look at roads, bridges, rail, certainly air traffic control, airports, broadband, transit, what's the biggest bang for the buck in general and certainly that affects your industry?
Thanks, Representative Lewis. I'm a little biased relative to making sure we take care of the ag economy. And I think the ag economy in Minnesota and the rest of the United States really can benefit from continued investment in our port system and our riverways. And I mentioned a little while ago that the efficiency of our riverway system relative to volumes that you can put on a barge, you can put 50,000 bushels on a barge, maybe 1,000 bushels on a truck, so it's environmentally friendly, but it does have limitations. So I think relative to not forgetting the importance of the rural economy and the jobs and the importance of the rural economy to the agriculture system, I think for us, they're all connected. It's kind of a three-legged stool: rail, road, rivers, as well as ports. But for us, I think it's riverways and barge transportation and ports.
Mr. Smith, you had mentioned the idea of moving to a system that is essentially a user fee system, or getting closer to that. And you talked about congestion pricing. That intrigues me a little bit, and intrigues a lot of people who haven't just read Reason Magazine lately. But we've got a couple of interstates there that sometimes during the day it's relatively free-flowing, but not at 7:30 and not at 4:30. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Well, congestion pricing would presumably move some of that traffic into the shoulder periods where the highways aren't utilized as much. There are many people that don't have discretion in when they travel, but congestion is always on the margin. In other words, it's that last 3-5% that causes gridlock. So moving a relatively small number of cars and trucks into the less congested time of the day makes the infrastructure more productive. That's what they showed down in Florida when they used congestion pricing. Having said that, the real key is to provide more infrastructure and alternative routing. So you can't just solve the problem with some sort of technology and congestion pricing and incentives to use higher occupancy vehicles and so forth. You've got to build the additional infrastructure that I was reading from a little earlier, that are interstate highway projects that we could start building tomorrow if there were funds available to do it.
I think we do have to do exactly that. In fact, I used to say that the trucker's a lot more productive with the truck. Now we can include the road too. They've got to get the infrastructure. Now there are opponents to some of this. Real quickly, anybody on the panel, and I hear it in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area quite a bit, that, well, this is great, but you can't build your way out of congestion. We hear that from the opponents of adding on to any infrastructure capacity. Anybody can comment on that if they like, but I hear that a lot.
Well, to some degree, it's like saying in Memphis, Tennessee, nobody would like to use a bridge across the Mississippi River other than the one we have because it's so heavily utilized.
Yeah, right.
So you build another bridge, and all of a sudden you're amazed at how many people decide we want to go over there to avoid the congestion or build a new shopping center or whatever the case may be. So I don't think there's any question about the fact that the United States Department of Transportation with the states has a lot of wonderful projects to increase our capacity and reduce congestion.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Johnson from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I suppose it's been kind of frustrating over the last several years to witness members of Congress strictly adhering to their promise under the Taxpayer Protection Pledge to oppose any increase in federal government tax revenues. Has that been as frustrating for you as it has been for many of us?
Of course.
And you, of course, know what that Taxpayer Protection Pledge is.
Well, that's Grover Norquist's pledge that you have to sign, right?
That's correct.
Well, I would point out to you one thing here. Our senior senator from Tennessee was heavily involved in the Inland Waterway Act, and it's my understanding that the various interests that are opposed to taxation became supportive once the revenue source was redesignated as a user fee.
So do
That's
you mean
Inland Waterway Trust Fund funding.
So do you mean that there was an exception made to the Grover Norquist Taxpayer Protection Pledge that resulted in new revenues
That's my understanding.
to the federal government. Well, I think that's a wonderful event that has occurred. I wonder if we can duplicate it. Do any of you other panel members have anything to say about the strict adherence that we've seen towards this taxpayer pledge, while looking, of course, at what was written out of our Constitution that our chairman put on the wall? It says, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises." It doesn't say Grover Norquist shall have the power. What do you all think about that? And I see you raising your hand, Mr. Trumka.
Yeah, I think it's had an absolutely horrible effect on the competitiveness of this country. We get further and further behind every year because we're starved for revenue to be able to do the basic infrastructure that this country needs, let alone the infrastructure we need to transform us into the 21st century. If you have a house and the roof starts to leak on the house and you don't take care of it, it gets more and more and more and more expensive. The more we delay with infrastructure, the more and more and more and more expensive it gets, and the less and less and less competitive we get. I think we're all pretty much in harmony on the fact that infrastructure needs to be done now, and done at a very, very large scale.
And it's going to take increased revenues to do it right.
Absolutely. And could I just ask one other thing? I wanted to comment to Mr. Congressman Lewis when he said, "What's the biggest bang for your buck?" The best way to get the biggest bang for your buck is to get the lowest cost of capital for your buck. The lowest cost of capital spreads those bucks a lot further. And I will work with this committee to do that, to make sure that the funding source gets us the lowest cost of capital.
Well, I think that's important. I also want to talk about another factor in profitability for businesses, and it is this issue of worker productivity. And I want to ask you all whether or not you believe that having a satisfied, well-paid workforce contributes to productivity and profitability when it comes to your companies. And if so, then why would we support any measures that would hurt workers' ability to collectively bargain for issues that would create more productivity for workers?
So I agree that an engaged and happy workforce is critical to success. But I don't think that you have to have collective bargaining exclusively to achieve that. We've got about 70,000 workers in the United States, and some are union employees and some are not. And I think you can have engagement and productivity in both circumstances. So I don't think
shouldn't workers be able to choose whether or not they want to collectively bargain or not? I
think that's generally the case, is it not?
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't want to hurt that ability, would you?
I think you want to give people the opportunity to be well informed and to be able to make the choice that they feel is best for them. Yes.
Well, I think that is common ground that we can all agree to, and I thank you all for being here today, and I thank the chair and the ranking member for having this hearing as our first hearing of this new session of Congress. It's so important. I also have a statement that I would like to introduce for the record.
Objection to order.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
I yield back.
Mr. Schmucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a former business owner, a contractor, understood the importance of highway system that enabled us to move goods and employees to job sites. And in my particular area, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, when we had new highway systems, bypasses around bottlenecks built, it opened entirely new markets for our company because we could get to a new market in an hour or so, which was sort of our limit. So with that background, I'm really happy to not only be part of the committee, but to be part of this hearing as the first thing we're doing in this session. We're really evaluating the impact of government investment in our infrastructure system. I want to share just a little bit of experience. I served in the Pennsylvania State Legislature or the State Senate for 8 years, and we were successful in passing an infrastructure bill, basically a highway funding bill, after years of not having done so. Pennsylvania highways and bridges have a bad reputation, a high number of bridges that were rated insufficient, and we were able to get a bill passed, and this was in an environment, to the point that was just raised, this was in an environment where at the same time, we, and with my support, my caucus, other members, other Republican members, we were turning our state budget inside out, looking for ways to save dollars and ensure that we were providing for more efficient use of taxpayer dollars. We literally went line by line throughout the budget and eliminated hundreds of line items and reduced overall spending. But at the same time, we were able to pass a transportation bill that increased our funding for transportation. How did we do that? Number one, we said that we were there to focus on the core functions of government. And there were a lot of areas where we shouldn't have been, it was better done in the private sector. But our infrastructure can be done best at least, or primarily can only be done through government, maybe public-private partnerships. We did some of that as well. But it is a core function of government critical to our environment. It was a lot of work there, but what it took, I think what took it over the finish line, and this is maybe there'll be a question at the end of this for whoever may want to answer, but really what took it over the finish line was a well-coordinated, well-funded effort to educate the public on the importance of investment in our infrastructure. And we talk about the creation of jobs during the building of roads or whatever it may be. There are also huge economic benefits. You've all talked about that in terms of jobs created, economic growth, and so on. So I guess, I saw it, whether it was the Transportation Association, the chambers throughout the state, the Pennsylvania State State Chamber of Commerce, coordinated effort to educate the public about the costs of congestion, of waiting in traffic, and so on and so forth, and about increased safety. So my question to you is, what efforts are we making here at the national level to drive public support, to build public support for an investment in infrastructure that we're talking about?
I'll answer quickly, which is I think it's a good point, because I think when it comes to transportation infrastructure, what's most commonly thought about is I'm spending a lot of time in my car getting to and from work. And it's far more complicated and nuanced than that. We've got railroads, we've got ports, we've got riverways, and we've got highways, and they're all interconnected. So I think the message that we in the private sector can help deliver in conjunction with the public sector is there is a cost. Infrastructure is not just about highways. It's an interlinked system, and it's costing the country a lot of money and a lot of job opportunity.
You're good.
We are already doing a lot of education with our central labor councils, our state feds, and all of our strategic partners, religious groups, environmental groups, and things of that sort. One of the things is to educate them, and most people don't know the figures, that the average commuter spends 42 hours a year.
That's the kind of, and I'm sorry, at the end of my time, I'm going to cut you off, but that's the kind of information that, what we're talking about in the hearing room today that the public needs to hear. Yep. And that's how we're going to begin to build the kind of support we'll need
and we're doing
to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmucker. Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank the ranking member for raising the important issue of how we're going to pay for this. I know it's not directly in our jurisdiction and in this committee, but it's something that we really need to focus on. I want to move very quickly through a few things. The first, I just want to mention The Recovery Act funded some things that were sort of expanded what the definition of what some people may think of as infrastructure. But for example, fire stations were funded, and I think those are important facilities, certainly critical for public safety. So I think we need to have a serious discussion about what the definition of infrastructure is going to be. We won't have that here right now, but I just want to put that out there, that we may want to think more broadly and include things such as fire stations. I want to move on to something Mr. Trumka had talked about earlier. In his inaugural speech, President Trump made a commitment to Buy American principles. Too often, waivers and loopholes allow agencies and grant recipients to avoid compliance with domestic content requirements. So I'm introducing a bill next week, the Buy American Improvement Act. And one of the things my bill does to improve transparency and accountability is to close some of these loopholes. The bill is going to require that any waivers be published in the Federal Register so that businesses would be able to better identify products that are in demand and seek opportunities to work with the federal government. I want to ask Mr. Trumka if this will be helpful, and if there's anything else that you want to expand on, anything else we can do to better make sure that we are buying American and hiring Americans.
Closing the loopholes would be tremendously helpful because as it stands right now, the lack of that's had a devastating effect on a lot of industry, steel industry, auto industry, and a number of others. We recommend 4 things along those lines. One is that the percentage requirements should be increased until we get to 100% American content requirements. The Buy America must attach to all infrastructure, including, as you noted, firehouses, schools, and drinking water. The loopholes should be closed and the process standardized. I think you mentioned that your bill would do that. You'd have to publish it in the register, any waivers, so that people would know what the standards are, how you meet them and why you don't meet them. And DOT must implement, I think, a uniform and transparent standard for waivers so that the law is followed as intended. I think those would have a very, very beneficial effect, create a lot of jobs in America, and make us, quite frankly, far more competitive.
Thank you. I wanted to move on. Something Mr. Larson had mentioned. I want to ask Mr. Smith and Mr. Willish if there's anything that you think the federal government needs to do in regard to really facilitating driverless vehicles. I know they're going to be very important and already coming onto the road, not just cars, but also for trucks. Is there anything either of you want to add, say that we should be doing in order to better facilitate this at a federal level?
Well, very simply, potholes and discontinued markings stand in the way of automatic driving. But those basic requirements should be fulfilled anyway for any car, any truck that's using American roads or roads in the civilized world. So I'd say this is the basic requirement that we have to fix.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think that the way forward is to have the United States Department of Transportation have a standardized nationwide certification process, just like we do for aviation. So if you want to make an airplane in the United States, the DOT, FAA doesn't tell you how to do it, but you've got to meet certain standards with your engineers, and then they certify. So just as was mentioned, there need to be standards for the roads, the markings, the redundancies, and all of the technology. The worst thing that could happen is for automated vehicles to be subject to a balkanized regulatory system at the state level. So that's my suggestion to what we should do to promote autonomous vehicles.
Thank you very much. My time is up. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. Mr. Perry is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for taking your time to be here today. Private sector financing of infrastructure seems to be at least a discussion, if not a cornerstone, of the new administration. And I, too, am interested in that, specifically for transportation and how the private sector can be used to improve the transportation system. I was privileged to sit on the P3 panel in this very committee that we discussed a lot of those things. It's for some things, maybe not for some other things. But I'm just wondering, anybody on the panel there, if you believe the committee should encourage and leverage the ingenuity of the private sector, or if there's anything specifically that you would recommend in that regard that we should consider, look at, encourage, et cetera. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think already a lot of the public-private partnerships have been in certain areas, like I think in rail and energy and telecommunications. So some of those, there are already some probably best practices there. And again, I think we've all said we're going to need more than that, though. But looking at what has worked well in maybe those three areas would be something that could be replicated in some other areas of infrastructure, because we've got lots of areas of infrastructure.
Anything particular in highway and surface?
You know, it seems like highways are such a huge area. We flow people and products all the time on highways. So I think looking at the Highway Trust Fund and how we can make that solvent for the future is probably number one.
I'll give you an example. I'm sorry, Mr. Trump, could go ahead.
I would just make 2 points. One, permitting reform would be helpful to get projects up and going quickly. And the second thing is, when you look at public-private partnerships, you still should look for the lowest source of capital, so that they aren't used to siphon off capital at a higher rate rather than going back into infrastructure.
So and I would agree with you. I think there's a situation I know in the district I'm privileged to represent along a federal highway where there's a fair amount of business, but there's not a off-ramp. There's not an interchange there. And the people that own the surrounding businesses have said, we'd be interested in building it and charging people to come off of it to recoup our investment or whatever at some point, or working some arrangement out with that. But there's no vehicle for them to do that, pardon the pun. You see any problem or downside to something like that at the federal level?
Well, again, you're looking at the revenue source, and we would, if you're going to do that, you still, in the building of that thing, you'd still want to have Section 13C and Davis-Bacon and all of those things apply, so that it isn't used to drive down the wages of people in that community.
But aside from those things, you don't have any issue with it?
Oh, if it can work, then we would work to see that it worked.
All right. And Mr. Trumka in particular, with your exchange with the gentlelady from Miami-Dade, you mentioned inequality. I have a question for you regarding Davis-Bacon. Now, according to some studies, increases transportation project costs by over 9%. And I know that there's going to be little agreement on what the percentage is. From my experience running my own business, it increased the cost, but that's my experience, and that's just some conjecture out there. But I would just ask you that the average current transportation project cost for an average cost is $1.5 million, and the existing threshold stands at $2,000 since it was moved down in 1935. That's a long time ago. I'm just wondering if you'd be amenable to having a discussion about raising that threshold concomitant with inflation since 1935. There are many people in the United States that see this as the last vestige of Jim Crow, as it literally keeps out some people that want to get into the trades, but they can't because the threshold is so high that small businesses can't compete because they can't get in.
Well, I would say no. I think, if anything, the threshold ought to be eliminated because the government should never, 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 never be in a position of doing work below the community standard. That's all it does. It says, Davis-Bacon says, the community standard is X. And if that person is paying less than X, they're paying less than the normal people in that community are paying. Not the federal government, but the people in that community. If you come in and you start using tax dollars to go below the community standards, you drive down wages for everybody. That was thought a bad thing because it spirals us downwards. I still think it's a bad thing, and so I would say eliminate the threshold altogether.
But you would agree that was not the original genesis of Davis-Bacon. I mean, that
That was the original genesis of Davis-Bacon, was to make sure that the federal government didn't use tax dollars to drive down wages.
No, it was to keep out certain classes of workers, namely blacks and immigrant workers from
No,
federal projects.
I totally-
can cite that for you, but okay.
I would
appreciate your
totally
opinion. Thank
disagree with you
Mr. Chairman. I
about
yield
that.
back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Lawrence is recognized.
Chairman and Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio, thank you for holding this hearing. I was a mayor for 14 years, and during that time, I had people come to me directly when water pipes, potholes needed to be fixed, and I got it done. But mayors across this country are very concerned now because they're making financial decisions about the taxpayers' dollars in their community, and they knowingly know that their disinvestment in the infrastructure is going to have an effect sooner or later. Mayors across the country, and there was an article in Politico, highways aren't enough. We are at a critical time, and I'm comforted to hear our plan for investing in the infrastructure. I'm also encouraged by, one of the few things I'm encouraged by is that this administration has made a commitment to invest in our infrastructure. Today we have a panel, business, labor, CEOs, talking to us, and we're all on the same page, Democrats and Republicans. Maybe this is our time to really put our actions and money behind what we all know should be happening. Mr. Trunka, I was very intrigued by your job training and apprenticeship programs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I started the Skilled Trade Caucus here in Congress. The average age of a skilled trade worker is 53 years old, and we have pretty much decimated the training and investment in a trained, skilled workforce. We do not have the number of young people entering into the skilled trades. We know that if we do this investment in the roads, we will get jobs, but they'll be skilled trade jobs. So, Mr. Trunka, you have a really bird's eye view of the challenge of the skilled trade and apprenticeships. Can you talk to us about how we can invest when we're doing our plan, that we're also training the workforce that can get the jobs?
Well, I can try. We have started partnering with community colleges to do remedial courses, but to do one other thing. We've also looked at small manufacturers that need maybe 10, 20, 30 people, and we've said, we'll provide that skills for you. We'll train them, but you have to guarantee a job at the end of the mill.
Exactly.
And we've been working with them. And if anything you can do to encourage that kind of commitment together, us getting people together, and helping our apprenticeship programs, obviously, the more work you have, the more people you put through it, the more people you can put through the apprenticeship program, the remedial program, and put them to work. And the beautiful thing about the apprenticeship program is you're getting an education. When they come out, they're two-thirds of the way to a Bachelor of Science degree.
Exactly.
They have an associate degree, and they're getting paid the entire time that they're in the apprenticeship program, and it's helping our employer because you have a mix between journeymen and apprentices that actually help us develop the skills necessary to go forward.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to also emphasize how important it is, I think, probably for this committee, as others, to also work with the Department of Labor to show that these things need to work together. And I think across the nation, and I know manufacturers have been talking about that as well as infrastructure for many years, the skilled workforce is so important. Just one example, in the state of Iowa now, our governor has made it a goal that at least 70% of high school graduates go on to something, either a 2-year program, which we're highly recommending, 4-year, or a good certificate program.
Yeah.
And again, that includes the apprenticeships and the internships and the co-ops. And I know we also, our company has a career academy in our high schools, our local high schools, so that the students get release time to do what we call real world work.
Yes.
And I loved it when I had a senior in high school come and work with a computer programmer for a couple weeks. This was like a winter program. At the end, he said, I now have found a real world application for algebra. And he's going on to a 2-year institution.
I want to, because my time is running out. Mr. Smith, you have the truck drivers, and you have a real need for a skilled workforce there. Is there any, as far as roads and getting our skilled truck drivers together, do you see a connection here?
Well, I think that the most important thing to get people on the roads that are qualified is to invest in the technologies that make the vehicles more safe, which we're doing to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and it makes the job more pleasant. As I mentioned, we should have autopilots in the vehicles to make it less boring and so forth. Let me give you a real life example. We have thousands of aircraft mechanics, and the whole job has changed because of digital technology. So we partnered with a community college in West Memphis, Arkansas. We're training these folks. They come in as apprentices, and those with full benefits and so forth are a fantastic job, much higher paying than many college graduates. So I think business and the states at the community college level working with businesses can produce a lot of high-income blue-collar jobs in the United States. They're not even blue-collar jobs anymore. They're
skilled trade jobs.
computer-oriented.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you, Ms.
And I just urge members to stay on 5 minutes or less. They're gonna call a vote in about 1:15. I don't want to shortchange anybody. I don't want anybody not to get a chance to ask questions. With that, Mr. Graves is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for being here. I appreciate your endurance. This has been very helpful, though. Ms. Andrenga, if I remember correctly, you were on the President's Export Council. Is that correct? President Obama, years ago during the State of the Union speech, indicated his intention of doubling exports. And I don't remember the year. I think it might have been 2015. And as I recall, nothing close came about. Could you talk a little bit about looking back where you see some of the course corrections that you would have done had you started over again?
Yeah, that definitely was a goal, and we were making progress for a few years, but to be honest with you, for us, I know as an exporter, when the dollar went so high, our high dollar made it much more difficult to export because we were competing with less cost from a lot of our competitors overseas.
Did you see a role in investment in infrastructure at all?
There was I was on the workforce group, and we talked a lot about the skilled workforce that we need, and we also talked a lot about how to make sure we include small and medium-sized enterprises. Infrastructure was definitely one of the topics, and usually the Secretary of Transportation was at those meetings. So, I mean, it was definitely connected. But maybe, we talked a lot about ports, we talked a lot about water, but probably not as much maybe as we could have.
Okay. Thank you. Many of your companies, you deal with logistics, and obviously a critical part. Part of your calculation, Mr. Smith, Mr. McLennan, specifically gets back to looking at efficiency. You have to get products to certain places in certain periods of time. You look at different routes, you look at different modes of transportation, and you have to determine the most efficient way of delivering something. Similarly, we've talked in this committee today about the need for additional investment to recapitalize our infrastructure. But there has not been a lot of conversation about whether we're using the right prioritization system. You have to prioritize how you're going to get a product from A to B. Do you have any comments about the current system that we use to prioritize the investment of infrastructure dollars in the United States? Here's where I'm going. We all know four-lane roads that don't have a single car on them. We all know four-lane roads that are bumper-to-bumper traffic. Do you have any thoughts about lessons learned, perhaps from your business, from your perspective, about how we could do a better job investing our existing dollars? I ran an infrastructure program for a number of years, and everyone's first go-to is we need more money. And I don't believe that's always the case. And I'm not saying, I think we need additional capitalization here, but I also think that we probably can squeeze additional efficiencies out by doing a better job using the right metrics to prioritize investment.
Well, I think that's true, and I think that's going to be a big source of focus of Secretary Chao. She's very good at this area, and she will prioritize the things that have the greatest national impact on the national productivity and efficiency. And I read off a litany of projects that would...
Including my home state of Louisiana, which I appreciate.
Well, one of them's right in Louisiana, that's right. So that's what we ought to prioritize right there, and adding to and improving and updating our interstate highway system in the main.
Mr. McLennan, you'd like to
I
add
would
anything?
just add to that I think, in a traditional capital allocation model, you're looking at returns on capital, and Rich, you mentioned lowest cost of capital. But I think relative to infrastructure, I think sometimes you can put quantitatives aside and go to qualitatives. Get some quick wins. Get some very visible projects, and the congressman previously had asked about how can we educate the public. But I think it's not just necessarily about return on capital, but I think it's about speed, getting money into the system. And I incorrectly said 141 million hours of downtime in the LOX system. It's 141,000. But things that can get these bottlenecks done and get money into the system fast and visibly, I think is a good model to apply. Call it a qualitative model.
Thank you. Last question. I want to ask you to be very brief so I can return some time back. But just very quickly, do you believe that there's an opportunity to increase utilization of waterways in an effort to help reduce congestion on highways?
Absolutely. I've mentioned before about the efficiency of the waterways, and you can get more bulk, from the agricultural economy onto our waterways. Your home state, I mean, we mine salt in Louisiana and ship it up the river and bring up fertilizer up the river, and it takes pressure off the highway system. So part of being the interconnected system, the opportunity here is invest across the board, rails, roads, ports, and rivers, and that frees up congestion on the highway system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question from the new chairman from the Water Subcommittee. Mr. Payne's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member for holding this hearing. Such a great cross-section of industry in this country and issues around transportation. Mr. Trunka, I come from, I'm a lifelong resident of Newark, New Jersey, and the city's unemployment rate is currently around 9 or 10%. Yet, my district sits at the doorstep of what could potentially be the nation's largest infrastructure project in the coming decade, the Gateway Project. Billions of dollars of public investment are needed to make the Gateway a reality. Can you speak a bit more about how large-scale infrastructure investments and training people, just as the training that you were talking about, can help put our nation back to work?
Yeah, we're talking trillions. I think the deficit for old infrastructure is approaching $4 trillion right now, and the Society of Civil Engineers say it'll take another couple of trillion to get us into the 21st century. If you want to ease congestion on highways, maybe we ought to look at high-speed rail and train systems like Europe does that get people around a lot. All of those things can help with us and create jobs in the process.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Smith, let me also say that my hometown is a big hub for you, and we, if you want to continue to expand there, we welcome that. But there are quite a few people in my district, that benefit from your company and being able to work for FedEx. And just wanted to say thank you. I was able to tour the facility when I first got to Congress and found very impressive operation. You and Mr. Villas both spoke on the need to modernize our ports, our airports and our seaports. We've seen federal investment in the Port of Newark and Elizabeth, but much, much more is needed to stay competitive. Newark Airport is aging as well. I know both of your companies rely on these critical ports to ship goods. Can you speak more specifically to investing, the investments that our aging airports and seaports need to keep you competitive?
Well, we obviously, as we expand, just see from 2007 to today, we've roughly almost doubled our volume that we sell in the United States, which also means, for example, our facilities in Port Jersey need to expand, and we are really trapped there as far as size of our facilities is concerned. We have no way to grow, so it really is one thing that we can get the right size of ships into the ports, and the other thing is, of course, the size of the port. It's both absolutely crucial to us, and we have a lot of issues, especially in Port Jersey.
Right. Yeah, the dredging's been finished there, and they're working on raising the Bayonne Bridge. Will help facilitate, the type of commerce that you're talking about increasing. Sir, would you like to?
Well, why don't I mention airports? Newark is a huge hub for FedEx. In most cases, you have to separate airport infrastructure from passenger terminals and additional runways. In the case of the airport infrastructure, we pay landing fees. So we're a huge contributor to the maintenance and operation of Newark Airport. We pay 80% in Memphis, a huge percentage at our big hub in Indianapolis. On the passenger side of the house, just as Mr. DeFazio said, that has to be done through some sort of user fee like PFCs or what have you. And the main thing is more runways and a modernized ATC system to make the air transport network more efficient and have more capacity. The latter are federal responsibilities.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Mr. Babin.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, giving us this great information that we need. I'm from Texas and represent the 36th District. I have 4 ports, including the Port of Houston, and more petrochemical facilities than any other district in the country. And so infrastructure and transportation is a huge thing for us. But with we're talking about user fees versus normal taxation. With a $20 trillion national debt and a $600 billion deficit coming up, looks like, funding is the 900-pound gorilla in the room. So I'd like to start with Mr. Trumka, if you don't mind. One idea that is frequently coming up is to dedicate the revenues and royalties from resources that resource development, which lie under our public lands, and which is estimated in some cases to be several trillions and trillions of dollars, which would go toward construction of public works projects, which would include roads and bridges and all the things that we've been talking about today. This would be American energy produced by American workers to finance and build projects with American labor that benefit American families. Is there any reason that you can give why such a concept might not be the top priority for an organization like the AFL-CIO, Mr. Trumka?
We'd be willing to look at it. Of course, the devil's always in the detail. If it were a giveaway to anybody rather than real projects like you just described, we'd probably blow the whistle on it. But I think we would be supportive of putting Americans to work, having energy independence, and being able to create and repair our infrastructure in the process.
Right, okay. And anybody else would like to comment on that as well?
We'd be fully supportive of it. Obviously, as Mr. Trumka said, the details are important, but we're blessed with these energy resources here in the United States. We ought to produce them and use some of the revenues to develop new alternatives and fund infrastructure. It'd be a great idea.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Andringa.
Yeah, just, I mentioned earlier, manufacturers are very dependent on energy and are always looking at all of the above, including wind and solar, but definitely traditional. And natural gas has been a very important thing for manufacturers. So I think it really could do two things, right? Help manufacturers with the most effective cost for energy that we need to run our plants, but also could be a source that could be used to help with some of the other issues in this country and certainly provide jobs.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Babin. Thank you. Mr. Davis, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Babin, for yielding back the balance of your time.
You bet.
We appreciate it.
You bet.
Hey, thank you to the entire panel. Let me get quickly to my question. Coming from Illinois, represent a lot of areas along the Mississippi and Illinois rivers. Very concerned about water infrastructure. I'm glad that that was addressed by many of my colleagues before me. But let me start with Mr. McLennan. We've had Cargill testify before my other committee, the House Ag Committee, so it's great to have you here on the T&I Committee to talk about that nexus of infrastructure that really helps the manufacturing sector in states like Iowa, also helps the agriculture sector in states like Illinois that are, slightly better agriculturally than states like Iowa, of course. Mr. McClellan, can you articulate for the committee the importance of our nation's inland waterway system, more so than what you did with some other questions, specifically along the Illinois and Mississippi rivers where you have many of your facilities?
So as you know, Congressman, in your district, you got locks 20 through 15 along the Illinois and the upper Mississippi riverways, transit, port are crucial for the rural economy, for the ag economy, for farmers to be able to get their crops to where they need to be. And we talked early on in the testimony about the world and the country going to 400 million people, the world going to 9 billion people rather. And our states, the Midwestern states, are feeding the world. And if we can't get the grain, and we saw it when you had the polar vortex and things freeze up and you don't have appropriate infrastructure, it all creates a backlog. And so it's the ports are the key, one of the key choke points for the ag and rural economy to be able to get our exports to the rest of the world, to get the food where it's needed.
Well, I completely agree, and I think we also agree for about 80 years. We've heard somewhat for about 80 years, but we've heard about long delays in our 80-year-old locks, and sometimes lasting hours at a time because the infrastructure is falling apart. Those have a tremendously negative impact on your business, correct?
Significantly negative impact on our business, and that of our farmer customers as well.
Absolutely. In 2007, Congress authorized NESP, the planning to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure along the Mississippi and Illinois rivers. But in 2010, the Obama administration ended the pre-construction engineering and design work for NESP and actually requested $0 in the last presidential budget for this project. I think you and I agree that this is something that's very crucial. We hope the next administration will look at this and also look at some of the most necessary improvements. Can you, though, explain to the committee and explain to the administration through this committee, from your position, why do we need to expand the locks from 600 to 1,200 feet?
Because when you have chambers that are, that small, you can't get the towboats through as a unit. You got to break up the barges. You got to break up the bulk. It's time-consuming. It's expensive. And that means when you have a higher cost and a less efficient transportation system at the locks, which, as you know, it's not a sexy topic. I mean, people think about highways and airports, but in our districts and our business, things like locks, ports, riverways are vital to the ag and rural economy. But when you add that cost and time, it flows back to the price that ultimately gets to the farmers. And so they're realizing that economy is then impacted because they can't get their products through in an efficient way.
Well, and last question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rank the improvements on the Mississippi and Illinois and our waterway systems and the need to do that for your customers?
10.
I was hoping you'd say like 11 or 12, but 10 will do.
Spinal
That's
Tap.
okay.
I'll go 11 out of 10.
Thank you, thank you. I really appreciate you being here, and thank you for your questions. And, you know, while I've got about 40 seconds left, I just want to say, you know, sometimes there are folks in my own party who don't believe we should invest in infrastructure. And we need to hear from you, and we did today, about how any investment of infrastructure helps to actually grow our economy, grow jobs, grow opportunity, and be a net benefit in a cost-benefit analysis. And Mr. Smith, a quick question. Do you agree that when America invests in infrastructure, it's companies like yours that can continue to grow some of the best paying jobs?
No question about it.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. DeFazio for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everybody. I think this was an excellent hearing. We kept you here a very long time. I think we found an incredible amount of common ground, and I intend to continue to push for us to actually, you know, finally put our money where our agreement has been and get some of these things done. I just do want to note that the cost of congestion since we began the hearing for American individuals and business was $54,750,000. So it's time to stop that clock and get America moving again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. And I saw a sigh of relief on the witnesses when I said Mr. DeFazio for a closing statement. So I'll be brief also. First, let me say thank you very much for being here. I know each and every one of you has a tremendous demand on your time, so we can't thank you enough for being here. I got to say this is one of the best panels that I've ever been involved with, getting testimony from. Again, you're coming from different places, you got different products, you got different things, but there is common ground, as Mr. DeFazio, and that point being that there is common ground. Somebody asked a question about informing the public. It was Pennsylvania. It was Mr. Schmucker. And the Pennsylvania model was that they did inform the Pennsylvania citizens. It was really the private sector that went out and really made the pitch to the taxpayers of Pennsylvania to get them on board to do this. So again, as we move forward, we're going to do our part, but we hope you folks will be out there banding together in your associations to educate the American people to the very basic. And we talk about, you know, Mr. DeFazio just pointed out $54 million. That's a lot of money. $120 billion or so is what we, every year in congestion. The average American has it's a lot of money, but they have no idea what that means to them. So talking to them about what it does to the cost of a package or foodstuffs or an automobile or your equipment, what that costs them in real dollars, you know, basically down to a cup of coffee. Is it a nickel more, a dime more because of the congestion you face? I think that's really an important message that we all have to get out there to the public. But again, this was, can't thank you enough, very informative, but it's all about building that 21st century infrastructure for America, and I know you're all committed to it, this committee's committed to it, and we're going to work hard to see that we get this done. So thank you very much for being here, and I would ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for additional comments, information submitted by members or witnesses to include in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to again thank you very much for being here, and the committee's adjourned.